regional escalation. But even if they're not seeking it, the fear is that it could still create one.
Is it too late to turn back after what's already been done here? And questions at the White House about the future of a ceasefire deal. As we mentioned, President Biden refuting reports out there today that they have turned away from this. And we're joined at the table now by Nick Wadhams, who, of course, runs our national security team here in Washington, D.C., and has been a very helpful hand on this story throughout the week. Nick, it's great to have you back. Maybe you can describe the moment that we're in here as we wait for the next shoe to drop.
Right.
And the White House says it's still working on a ceasefire. How could this all be happening at once?
Well, I think a couple issues here. One is ceasefire is just not going to happen anytime soon, is the feeling in the White House. I mean, folks we're talking to, I think, have a feeling that this is really not going to happen until after the election at the very least and well into next year. So that's one issue. I mean, it's so interesting to me, the comments you cite from the spokesman saying they don't want an escalation. I mean, the big question is, are we headed toward the precipice on a regional war? And when you look at this back and forth, the pager explosions, more than 25 people killed, Hezbollah shoots about 150 rockets last night. Israel kills the senior Hezbollah commander today. I mean, it feels like we're in it,
doesn't it?
Well,
so, how much worse can it get? It can get a lot worse, but it feels like we are moving toward, I don't know what else open conflict would look like between Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah, it does strike me that this is not necessarily black and white. We are engaged in a war, or we are not.
Right.
Clearly, there's a lot of gray area here. And when Israel says our goal is not to start a regional war, our goal is to just return Israelis to the north of the country. What if a war is required to do that? These aren't mutually exclusive things. Right.
And there's some questions from the administration as well about what the Israeli strategy, because they say, this pager attack was meant to essentially get Hezbollah to realize that we had won, that people were going back, and they need to get with the program and accept the fact that people are going to go back into the north. And it's like, well, if you're Hezbollah and Israel does that to you, I don't think the response is necessarily going to be like, okay, we put our hands up, we give up. It's just going to lead toward the desire for further retaliation, and that's the sort of escalatory spiral.
Well, if this does escalate, and we see Hezbollah, for instance, using ballistic missiles against Israel, what does that mean for the U.S. as a helping hand in defending Israel? We saw when the Iranians attacked, for instance, actual American aircraft shooting down missiles air to air. This could get very dangerous for Americans very quickly.
Right. I think what you would see is more U.S. involvement. And when you talk about the nightmare scenario and escalation, I mean, that really is the one that everybody is afraid of, that it's not just Israel and Hezbollah exchanging fire. It's the Houthis, it's Hezbollah, it's Hamas, it's Iran itself, all doing this and attacking Israel at one time, where you would then require the U.S. to come in. I mean, that strike in April, you had the U.K. and other countries also involved. All those countries would come in, Jordan was involved, and suddenly you have active participation. What if a U.S. fighter jet gets shot down? What if a missile hits a U.S. ship out in the Mediterranean Sea? I mean, there are all sorts of ways that this could play out very badly.
Well, and I wonder, as we kind of talk about, not to say that it is a slow burn, because obviously there are things happening and people are losing their lives in Lebanon at the moment, but the pace of escalation, if all of a sudden it is outright war between Israel and Hezbollah, how quickly that could become war, not just between Israel and Hezbollah and maybe Iran, but actually the U.S. directly engaged with adversaries in the Middle East, and more than just a defensive support kind of way.
Right, and I do think that is where people will say, listen, there is some hope here that it won't happen, because ultimately that is a scenario that no one really wants. I mean, Hezbollah, I think they understand they would not win a full war with Israel. Israel does not necessarily want to commit a massive ground assault into Lebanon. Iran does not want full-blown war. The U.S. certainly doesn't. So that's why I think you've also seen this sort of, I mean, you're right, it's not even necessarily a low boil, but why you always see these actions and then a scale down, and then they're acting and it scales back, and it sort of feels like all sides sort of recognize they're testing the margins of that, but so far we still at least see that scenario holding where all sides agree, listen, we do not want this to get sort of above a certain level.
All right, Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, who leads our national security coverage. It's been a long week for you. Thank you so much for your continued reporting on this. And we want to get more on what's happening in the Middle East and other issues now, live from Capitol Hill, where we're joined by a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey, the Democrat, is with us now. She, of course, is a former Navy helicopter pilot herself. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm not sure how much of you heard of our conversation with our very own Nick Wadhams there, but how concerned are you that there is potential for miscalculation or escalation from either Israel or from Hezbollah that ultimately could result in U.S. service members being put directly in harm's way?
Well, I'm incredibly concerned, and I think something that if I were the SecDef or SecState, that I would be having some very hard conversations with my Israeli colleagues about is why the U.S. wasn't informed. We are very engaged. We've been very supportive of Israel, and yet there was no heads up about the pagers. In fact, there appears to have been no strategy. Some of the reporting is that they had decided this was a use it or lose it situation. That's a quote by a former senior Israeli official, and there was no strategy behind it. And that's something I have big questions about. What is the strategy here? As you heard earlier, this idea that somehow they were going to show Hezbollah that they had won this by exploding these pagers, I think is very questionable, to say the least. And it's also a question about the larger strategy with respect to Gaza, because we know U.S. forces have already been put in peril. So Israel needs to bring the United States into the decision-making. We've been working overtime to try to have a ceasefire. That has been undermined by Netanyahu again and again and again. And I think we even see within the Israeli government people like the Minister of Defense Gallant questioning what the strategy is here, and now we are hearing reports that he and Netanyahu have a rift. So there is a real question right now as to how we move forward and make sure that this does not devolve. One of the things that scared me about the conversation you just had is a conversation about how could this get worse? It could get a lot worse, and that is my concern right now.
Well, I can hear the concern in your voice, Congresswoman, and we do appreciate your being with us today. I guess my question is, how far are you prepared to go then? This could happen at any moment if something did begin to happen wider between Israel and Hezbollah. If there is a concerted retaliatory strike against Israel that could involve ballistic missiles, what role should we ask our airmen and sailors to play?
Well, that is why we are working so hard to not get to that point. The United States has, during this conflict, moved carriers into the region. We've reached out through our allies to say we will not tolerate those types of attacks on Israel. But again, if we are going to move forward, if we are going to help create regional stability, I think with with Israel, we need to understand the strategy, and we need to be brought into that strategy.
Well, of course, as we consider the role the U.S. could play in many of these hypothetical scenarios, in which many of which, of course, the U.S. is actively working to avoid, it does raise the question around military readiness. And this was, in part, a conversation that was being had on Capitol Hill this week, as obviously your chamber shot down a continuing resolution that would have extended for 6 months and raised concern among defense hawks about the impact it could have on the budget of the Pentagon. Now the talk, Congresswoman, is that it will be a 3-month clean continuing resolution. Are you prepared to support that?
We do need a clean continuing resolution, and those are the talks right now. And we need to make sure that it doesn't last too long, because here's the problem with continuing resolutions for the DoD. They do not allow for new start programs, so all of the programs that we have been working on over the year that we think are important for the security and readiness of our military will not be started. We also are going to have to stop some programs that can't grow because they don't have next year's appropriations passed. They have to stay at this year's numbers. This all comes at a time as we are looking over our national defense strategy and seeing some real concerns about how we fund the military of the future and where we are investing. We need to be more innovative. We need to figure out how to do this more economically in many cases with off-the-shelf technology, but these conversations will come to a halt if we are simply operating on last year's appropriations.
Well, how about we deal with the matter at hand first, though? In 11 days, is the government going to shut down?
You know, I think from what I am hearing, we are working together to get a continuing resolution passed that will be a clean continuing resolution. I would suspect it will go past this election so we can take it out of some of this partisan atmosphere and really get down to work in the lame duck session so we can get our appropriations passed before the new year. That is very much what I would like to do. It is a shame that we are in this partisan fight, that the majority continues to put these bills on the floor that are partisan bills. I know that former President Trump has suggested we shut the government down. I very much hope we don't do that. He was the president the last time and the longest time we shut the government down. I think that cost our GDP about $11 billion, according to the CBO. So this is something that's bad for the economy, bad for the country, and certainly bad for all of those people who serve the public in these jobs that will be shut down and they won't be receiving paychecks.
Well, of course, the notion that Republicans should not vote for any continuing resolution that doesn't include election security measures was something we heard from Donald Trump this week. But that is not all, Congresswoman. He also, at a rally in Long Island this week, suggested that he wants to remove the SALT cap, which, yes, we know was put into place during his first administration with the 2017 tax cuts in the first place. But for states like the one you represent, New Jersey, isn't this welcome news?
You know, where has he been on this? I mean, he implements this in 2017. It's been disastrous for New Jersey. There have been numerous bills that I've worked on to pass through the House that we could not get through the Republican Senate. I have a bill now that I've been promoting. If former President Trump wants to see us getting rid of the state and local tax deduction cap, which I very much want to do, then he has the legislative proposals to do so. I just don't find this sudden change of heart in Long Island at a rally with people who would want to see us getting rid of this cap very credible. He has real actions he could take to get rid of this disastrous plan he put into place, so I would like to see him do that.
But you actually, to Kaylee's point, you have legislation that would help to restore the SALT deduction. Have you talked to the Trump campaign about this? Will you reach across the aisle and make this work?
I will certainly make a suggestion to them and alert them to my legislation because, look, I am always fighting for New Jerseyans. I put governing ahead of partisan politics. It would be great if Trump would do that. I've not seen it yet.
So you haven't heard from Speaker Johnson on this?
But I'd like to. I've not heard from Speaker Johnson on this. I will reach out to him.
All right, well, as we look for progress on that legislation you've put forward, Congresswoman, I'd like to talk about another bill you co-sponsored, and it's one to award the Congressional Medal of Honor to Billie Jean King. Did pass the House, indeed. Would love, in our final moment with you, Congresswoman, just to hear more from you on this. She's the first female athlete to receive this honor.
Yeah, she'll be the first female individual athlete to receive this honor, which I'm so incredibly proud to be able to deliver on this. With my colleague Brian Fitzpatrick, Nicole Maliotakis worked hard on this, and we were able to get it across the finish line. She is such an iconic figure and such a figure that transcends so many generations. So when Brian Fitzpatrick was talking about this legislation and told his mother he was going to meet Billie Jean King, his 90-year-old mother was thrilled. When I told my 19-year-old daughter that I was going to meet Billie Jean King, she got tears in her eyes. Billie Jean King represents such a fight for women, for equity, for Title IX, and has made a huge difference. And I was sitting last night at a basketball game for the WNBA between the Mystics and the Fever, and it was a sellout crowd, a record-setting crowd. And as I looked across that arena, I couldn't help but think about how it was Billie Jean King's work that got us to that point, and we need to continue that. And I would just end by saying that today marks the 51st anniversary of the Battle of the Sexes, that most iconic moment when she beat Bobby Riggs.
Wow, what a great moment to spend some time with Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. Thank you, Congresswoman, for being with us here, and thank you for your service. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. The panel's up next, right here on Bloomberg.
7:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a number of developing stories. Alphabet's Google set to be hit by another attack from European Union watchdogs, paving the way for a hefty fine and an order to change its business model unless the American giant takes rapid action to give more prominence to rivals across its sprawling search engine. That headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. We've got Alphabet shares. Alphabet, the parent of Google, up by about 0.5%. And Federal Reserve Governor Michelle Bowman says cutting rates by a 0.5 percentage point risks signaling that the central bank is declaring victory over inflation too early. U.S. stocks trading mixed. The S&P is off session lows, but still down by about 0.1%. The Dow up 86 right now, up 0.2%, while NASDAQ lower by 0.3%. 10-year yield 3.72%, with a 2-year that's yielding 3.57%. Gold up 1.4%. Spot gold surging to another record today. Gold now at $26.22 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil higher by 0.4%. WTI 72.25 a barrel. Nike shares today are advancing. We got Nike up by 6.1% after ousting beleaguered CEO John Donahoe, bringing longtime executive Elliott Hill out of retirement in a bid to return the struggling athletic brand to its glory days. Again, we've got Nike up by 6.1%. Recapping, stocks are trading mixed. Dow Industrials up 0.2%. S&P narrowing its loss now to 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Taking us from New York down to Washington, and we're going to take it now down from Washington to North Carolina, where the gubernatorial race has been rocked by a story published yesterday by CNN about Republican gubernatorial candidate and current Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, in which he, about a decade ago, posted on a number of online porn forums and others suggesting that he is a, quote, black Nazi, and referring to himself at one point as a, quote, perv, some disparaging language around Martin Luther King Jr. as well. Donald Trump, of course, has called Mark Robinson Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids in the past. Now, we should point out that Mark Robinson does deny these allegations. He posted this video in response yesterday.
You all have seen the half-truths and outright lies of Josh Stein on these ads over and over again. And now a story leaked by him to CNN is appearing now. Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before.
A couple of important things to note here, Kaylee. This is the only Democratic-held governorship that is up for election in this campaign in a state that Donald Trump won in 2020. So we were watching this really closely already.
Yes.
It was at least too close to call at one point, which made it one of the most expensive races. It is not too close to call any longer. The Hill Emerson College finds an 8-point spread. Josh Stein leading Mark Robinson. Carolina Journal Signal poll finds a 7-point lead by Josh Stein, the Democrat. But one other important factor here is there was a deadline at midnight. If they were going to get Mark Robinson off the ballot, it would have had to happen before then. So the ballot is codified, and this is our race.
Well, and perhaps most important of all, on that ballot, Mark Robinson's name will appear with Donald Trump's. And the question is not just what it means for the outcome of the gubernatorial race, but also what it means for the outcome of the Electoral College vote of North Carolina, which a Democrat has not won since 2008, but polls suggest is neck and neck between Trump and Harris.
That would be a 1-point race, according to the same 2 polls I just mentioned. So let's assemble our panel for their take on this. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, of course, Democratic analyst, political science professor, Iona University, and Bloomberg politics contributor, also joined today by Republican strategist Maura Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies. It's great to have you both with us here. Maura, I'll start with you. I hate to pull you into such a salacious story, but this is something that will rock the race, to Kaylee's point, and we're wondering what this means for the top of the ticket. We should note Mark Robinson was already not sharing a stage because of some concerns over his rhetoric with Donald Trump. What would the campaign do now?
Well, what's frustrating for the Republican Party is that presumably this man was vetted, and yet Trump the former president, still endorsed him, knowing that he called women who advocated for birth control to be witches, wanted women to no longer have the vote, would like to go back to that time. He talked about wanting to have slaves. He wanted, the list goes on, and I won't say it all here, but things that he has publicly said with videos to prove it doesn't bode well. And yet the former president endorsed him. And so now to be taking this back step to try and distance himself, it feels really too little too late. But I think what's going to be damaging in North Carolina specifically is the fact that people may not want to turn out to vote because they are not going to feel comfortable to go and sit and hit the Republican button for Trump and then have it go down ballot and their vote cast for someone like Mark Robinson. So I think what you're going to see is people maybe not turning out to vote. And that'll be a huge problem for the Trump campaign. But also just, speaking across the state, it's a problem.
Well, so Jeannie, then the question becomes what the Democratic ticket does in response. If you're Kamala Harris's campaign, are you saying, great, now is an opportunity to double down and throw resources into North Carolina? Or are you thinking, okay, well, we can still focus on those blue wall states we have to win. This is just a nice to win, and perhaps this story takes care of it for us.
Yeah, I think they have the resources with their fundraising they've done, which has been amazing, to spend on both. They obviously have to try to get those blue wall states. That's priority number one. But North Carolina, 1 point at this moment, that is something that they can pick up, and that would be a huge boost. Imagine a scenario where Donald Trump loses Pennsylvania, but can still win the Electoral College if he holds North Carolina, and he loses because of Mark Robinson. I mean, Donald Trump has done this to himself. This is Herschel Walker all over again, right? Mitch McConnell said candidates matter. They matter an awful lot. And I have to tell you, just personally, when I heard yesterday about this uproar, I thought, what else, given a litany of things Maura just told us, could he have done which would outrage people so much? I mean, this is a man who's an anti-Semite. He is a Holocaust denier. He is anti-LGBTQ rights. He is anti-women. I mean, he has said all of these things publicly. So, to hear there is more here, I couldn't imagine what it was. It's not even something you can say on television. It is so awful. And this is what's got the Republicans now running scared, because this guy is kryptonite up and down the ballot. And he threatens not just himself and the Republicans of North Carolina, but Donald Trump. So it's a mess Donald Trump has made, and he's going to have to deal with it because this guy is now on the ballot.
Donald Trump's in North Carolina tomorrow night, right? This will be interesting to see how he handles this, if he addresses it at all, and what the chant in the crowd will be. We should note, by the way, that the governor of North Carolina, Governor Cooper, is going to be sitting down for an interview with Anne-Marie Hordern coming up just about 2 hours from now, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And you better believe this will come up. We should note as well that in North Carolina, the governor and lieutenant governor are elected separately. They were not part of a single ticket, so he'll be speaking as a Democrat in this case about a Republican. Maura, I want to ask you about what happened in Nevada today as well. So you've got a forced error in North Carolina that could bring a state to Kamala Harris, and you've got a Supreme Court ruling that could bring her the state of Nevada. Depends on how the math shakes out, but the Supreme Court has sided with a state court in Nevada to keep the Green Party, Jill Stein, off the ballot because apparently signatures were not qualified properly in terms of each signatory being registered to vote in the county of residence. That's 1 or 2 points based on Bloomberg's swing state poll that Jill Stein might automatically give Kamala Harris. Did she just win 2 states without doing any work?
Well, and that's the interesting thing about this entire stretch of time since Joe Biden dropped out has been is if Kamala Harris could just stay the course and stay steady, appealing to a wide kind of voter population, she might be able to skate through and win this thing, because Donald Trump, the former president, has derailed himself and his campaign at every turn. In this situation with Nevada, what's interesting is that it sounds as though, when Jeannie said candidates matter, absolutely, but also following the proper forms also matters. And it looks as though that's what the mistake of the Green Party was when it comes to Jill Stein in Nevada. So it's just these major mistakes, but some, obviously with Donald Trump, he's doing them calculated. I mean, he's not, yesterday when he's speaking to a group about trying to talk about anti-Semitism and then ends up blaming the Jewish population. He cannot control himself, or his ego. And when you have an insatiable ego, that's just dangerous. And it's this recipe for disaster. And we're seeing that play out. And Kamala Harris, all she has to do is sit back and watch it, essentially, and just continue to talk in really like in big terms, because she doesn't have to get into the nitty gritty things because Trump is imploding in himself.
Well, Maura, I'm glad you raised his words at what was an anti-Semitism summit yesterday. Donald Trump trying to court Jewish donors. And he said, quote, "In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss," going on to say it's only because of the Democratic hold or curse on you. And that's not all we heard from Donald Trump at the same event last night. He also talked about reviving the Muslim ban that was put into place under his administration. Take a listen.
I will ban refugee resettlement from terror-infested areas like the Gaza Strip, and we will seal our border and bring back the travel ban. You remember the famous travel ban? We didn't take people from certain areas of the world because I didn't want to have people ripping down and burning our shopping centers and killing people, but we're not taking them from infested countries.
I should have been more careful with my words there. Muslim travel ban, obviously, is what he's advocating for once more. Jeannie, you take these two things together. Does any of it do what Donald Trump maybe was trying to accomplish, bringing more Jewish voters specifically onto his side?
You know, I don't know yet. We really haven't seen, at least I haven't seen a lot of polling to suggest that. There is a large contingent of the Jewish community who was happy with some of what he did when he was in office, and they feel that he is a big supporter, maybe bigger than Biden and Harris by their estimation, of Israel. That said, you listen to the language in that clip you just played, and you look at that in the context of infested countries, vermin. This is fascist language 101. It's the kind he has used throughout his time in public life. He continues to use, and it, of course, underscores what the Republicans are trying to do here, which is to keep pointing to the issue of immigration because they feel that is a issue that they can win on. And he wants the United States to go back to something he did when he was in office the first time, or tried to do, which is the Muslim ban. And so if people listen carefully, and the Harris campaign has got to play with this, do they want to go back to that? And the answer, you know, I would suggest is no, because the polling the first time wasn't as supportive of that as Donald Trump may have liked.
Maura, we only have 1 minute left. Does the Muslim ban simply keep the base or add voters to Trump's column?
It's a talking point that he remembers from years past and from 2016, so he's just recycling it. When he goes into these diatribes, he does just use old terms and old things that he knows that will rile the base. So when you let in saying, you know, he was trying to court large Jewish donors, I don't know that he was trying to court Jewish donors the way he spoke to them and pointing the finger at them and blaming them for his presumed potential loss. Again, this is a terrible strategy, and I highly doubt that his campaign had directed him to do such damage at this event.
All right, Maura Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies, our Republican panelist today, alongside Democratic panelist and Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano of the Center for the Study of the Democracy in Congress. Thank you both so much for being with us. We'll have much more still ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are pairing declines. The S&P still in the red after yesterday's surge. Right now we have got the S&P 500 index down 6 points, down by about 1/10%. The Dow reversing course, higher now by 85, up by about 0.2%, while NASDAQ is down 45, a decline of 0.2%. Stocks paired declines after Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller showed confidence inflation is coming down, stoking hopes for further rate cuts. 10-year at 3.72%, with the 2-year right now at 3.57%. Spot gold is surging $33 the ounce, up 1.3%. 26.20 right now, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 72.35 a barrel.
Bringing together enough talent in one organization is really hard to do. And if you're working on a problem that, may be modestly successful, it's kind of easy to get the first few people to join. You can give them a lot of equity. But then it gets really hard. Why is employee 20 going to join? Why does this matter to the world? Why should someone work on your startup versus any of the other things they could do? And picking something that matters if you're successful is a great way to do that. And so I think it's really important to think about, when you're starting the company, how is this going to evolve into a vision that a lot of people want to help with, that a lot of people want to be associated with? Because I think getting talent and getting mind share is really hard in the current environment, and people are interested in startups that matter. Another thing that we've noticed among our best founders again and again and again is that they have a confident and definite view of the future. They may be wrong, and so we say it's good to be confident and flexible, but this idea that you are confident and definite, this is what I think is going to happen, or this is what is going to happen, and being relatively sure of that, having courage of your convictions, being a clear leader, saying we're going to do this, and that's why, even in the face of a lot of doubt, that seems to really correlate with success. And this comes back to having an ambitious vision, but the entire startup ecosystem is best set up to support companies that have a low chance of success, but are huge if they work. And I think going for something that is huge if it works will attract the best people. I'm not going to talk too much about the team. There are a lot of obvious things I could say that have been said many times by many people about, you need smart people who want to work really hard and who communicate well. These are all really true. But I'd like to mention a few non-obvious things that we've noticed that we don't hear people say as much about the team you need to assemble. Vinod Khosla says that the team you build is the company you build, and I really think that's true. I've still met only a handful of founders, I think, that spend enough time on recruiting, like Mark Zuckerberg is famously one of them. But building a great team, I think, other than picking the right market and building a great product, is the most important thing you do. All founders go through a transition, all successful founders, where you switch from building a product to building a company, and building a company really is about the team. So you need optimists. The whole world will be telling you why you're going to fail as a startup. If you don't have that internal fire of belief, if you don't have people who say, you know what, we are going to do this, and it doesn't matter what the haters say, we're going to figure this out, and there is, this problem, it must be solvable. If you don't have the spirit of optimism on the team, it's very hard to succeed when the world continues to punch you in the face. You need at least some idea generators. There are a handful of people in any company that has gone on to be really successful that I've been able to work with, who are just really good at coming up with lots of ideas. You don't want too many of these people, because that's more ideas than a company can follow through on. But having some people within a company that are just constantly throwing out new ideas, most of which will be bad, turns out to be super important to have on the team.
Would have been a pretty fascinating move if he chose to do that.
Well, we didn't talk about it. So another thing you mentioned in your letter is that open source AI can accelerate innovation and economic growth. How is this already happening, and how do you see this happening more in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a version of this which AI will do no matter how it's developed. And then there's a version of this that I think benefits from open source specifically. So I think that AI has more potential than any other single technology that's being developed right now to increase productivity, accelerate the economy, make it so that kind of every person has the ability to be more creative and produce more interesting things. And I think that that's all going to be great. I also think, I hope that it'll help out with science and medical research and things like that. There are a lot of folks today, though, who don't necessarily have access to the ability to fine-tune or build their own state-of-the-art models. So they're sort of limited to what these large labs do. And like I just said, I think one of the defining aspects of our culture around innovation as a sort of a country or society is like, it's not just big companies that do it, right? There's all these startups and hackers and academics and people in university. And I think you want to give all of those folks access to state-of-the-art models that they can build on top of. Not just that they can run, which is what they have today with the closed vendors, but that they can build on top of and tweak and distill down to smaller models that they can run on their laptop or their phone or whatever other device they're building. And I think that that's just going to unlock a ton of progress. There's also a version of this where you can look at it by, nation too. So it's not just that startups might not have the resources or universities might not have the resources to go train their own, large-scale foundation models now or in the future. But there are a lot of countries that aren't going to have the ability to do that because, pretty soon these things are going to cost many billions of dollars to train. And I think that having the ability for different countries and entrepreneurs in different countries and businesses to use it to serve people better and just do better work is going to be something that basically like lifts all boats around the world and just has a massive kind of equalizing effect. So I think that that's really positive. And, that's one of the places where we get the most thanks for this is not actually the tech community, but it's like different developing countries or other countries that want to have access to the technology and do stuff with it. But wouldn't necessarily have the tech field themselves to produce something that is state of the art that their businesses can build on top of. But once they have it, it's actually pretty easy to go train your own thing. So that's a pretty neat part of this.
Let's talk about more on the benefit.
What they went through now, you can't get a seat in a restaurant in New York.
Yeah. Actually, we talked to both Danielle Boulud and Danny Meyer about that exact thing, what they went through, how they stayed alive, as it were, during that pandemic and how they came out of it. But the one theme that we came away with from everybody is, ironically, the pandemic makes us want to go to our favorite restaurant more because you want to belong with other people, feel like you belong, and people missed that for that time of lockdown. And actually, it's pent-up demand, which is really resurging in New York City.
All right. A lot of demand here in Washington, although I feel like it's easier to get tables here than in New York.
Well, everything is easier than New York, I think, in general. Did they feed you? Tell me you ate something good while you were there.
I've been asked that question, and we went to Danielle, and we went to Manhattan, actually, which is Danielle, and they had stuff laid out for us, and I had to get back to the office. I didn't eat a thing. No. And my team was saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, I'm sorry, I get back to the office. But yeah, they had it all laid out for us.
At least ask for a to-go box.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
I feel like we can make good on this. I feel like David will make good on this.
Well, no, they owe you one, Joe. Just come on up and ask Danielle. He'll give you something, I'm sure.
Well, we want to get him on the wine series. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. There you go.
At some point, we'll connect the dots here with David Weston. It's great to see you, David, and congrats on the new format, the new look on Wall Street Week. That's 6 p.m. Wall Street time, Kaylee, right after Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Yep, Bloomberg TV and radio, very much looking forward to it as you get a big picture, in-depth view at some of these key issues. And of course, it's nice to have that to cap the week here on Bloomberg TV when we spend so much of our day looking at the news in real time and what is breaking most immediately. And of course, we've gotten plenty of news in that regard today, from politics to business, including the red headline that crossed the Bloomberg terminal less than 2 hours ago, the FTC suing the three biggest pharmacy benefits managers, CVS, Cigna, and United Health specifically over their insulin rebate programs.
Yeah, we saw this coming as it's a story that Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has been working on for a couple of weeks now, and the FTC, in fact, making good on this action today. And Tyler joins us now here at the table in Washington. What should we know about this? These are the big three, if you will. As you've pointed out, Tyler, control 80% of this business.
Exactly. That's coming from an FTC report earlier this year. This actually caps off a 2-year investigation into these PBMs, these pharmacy benefit managers. A source at the FTC tells me that this was a long time coming. It's worth it to just name them again. It's CVS's Caremark, Cigna's Express Scripts, and United Health's Optum RX. They essentially serve as the middlemen, right? Negotiating rebates on behalf of insurers with these prescription drug companies. Now, this particular case focuses in on insulin and insulin pricing. The FTC here is essentially alleging that these companies have favored higher priced insulin products because that in turn would result in higher rebates and higher fees for these companies. Now, Bloomberg Television actually had the chance to sit down with an official from the FTC within an hour of this crossing the terminal. I want you to take a listen here to how the director of the FTC's Office of Public Affairs, Douglas Farrar, kind of outlined the agency's plan with us earlier here today.
One effect we contend is that they're basically just forcing the price of drugs up through a kind of reverse polarizing competition from being a good force in the market to a bad one. So on behalf of patients in particular, we filed this lawsuit to try to ensure that there's more competitive balance in this marketplace.
Now, as you mentioned, the FTC did release this report that found that these 3 PBMs have a huge portion of the market share. 80% of prescriptions passed through them last year. Now, for the PBMs part, they have all responded to this lawsuit. They are defending their practices. They're saying that without them, consumers would just have to go straight to the prescription drug companies and that instead they would be dictating their prices. I actually want to just quickly read from the Cigna spokesperson. They emailed a statement to Bloomberg News calling this a troubling pattern from the FTC of unsubstantiated and ideologically driven attacks. We should note that Cigna actually filed a lawsuit against the FTC earlier this week, citing defamation.
Well, and it's interesting, and when we heard from Douglas Farrar there, this notion that he's talking about drugs plural. They're specifically focusing on insulin with this action, but is it an action, if they are victorious, that could apply to other drugs that flow through these companies as well?
Exactly. So it's notable here that this could actually serve kind of as a precedent as the FTC does try to rein in potentially other drug prices. It's also notable that they didn't go after the drug makers, but the FTC did leave open the door that there could be further action down the line when it comes to some of those big drug makers that we are watching, like Eli Lilly, for example. And something that we've been talking a lot about is how this is also a political issue for both sides of the aisle. Prescription drug prices and insulin have come up on the campaign trail, and both the former Trump administration and the current Biden administration have taken actions in bids to try to lower costs.
It's funny, they both take credit for capping the cost of insulin, but this is part of what Joe Biden has been touting as a major accomplishment for his administration.
Exactly. I would point you most recently to the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually capped insulin prices at $35 per month for those on Medicare. But we're still waiting to see if any action would be taken for those on private insurance. You guys actually had the chance to catch up with Republican Congressman James Comer, the chair, of course, of the powerful Oversight Committee. And he was talking about how his committee might not be able to help lower these prices, but he pointed to some other committees in Congress that could do a broader job when it comes to this, since this is something that the American people are paying close attention to. Our own polling shows us that high prices, particularly when it comes to prescription medications, is top of mind.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, great reporting on this.
Thank you
so much. And it's interesting, Joe, as she raises Chairman Comer, who of course is a Republican. I question the timeline here as the FTC is bringing this suit now mid-September with an election just down the line in which Kamala Harris, according to Bloomberg's own reporting, is being pressure to have a new FTC chair, not Lena Khan. Questions around whether she will continue as the head of this agency and whether this is action that would continue to be pursued under the next chair. But perhaps this specific area bipartisan and something that both parties would continue to advocate.
It was just in the last week we heard Speaker Johnson say that he wouldn't want to wholesale dump the IRA. He would want to use a scalpel. And this might be one of the things that's left around after. You know, Kaylee, one thing we have not mentioned yet this entire hour is what happened today in Georgia a 3-2 decision on a hand count rule here. They're going to count millions of ballots by hand, the only state in the nation to do so, which could leave us waiting for some time for a critical swing state to be called.
Yeah, this is incredibly important. Of course, this is just one of a slew of new rules that have been passed by Georgia's election board, including rules that make it easier for local officials to essentially delay the certification of the results. It's critical to watch, and we'll have more on it in the late edition of Balance of Power. You can find that at 5 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
He says he doesn't even know if he should have come in today.
If we should have come in today.
Oh, we?
No, because any of us.
Why?
Because here, we had this whole huge buildup to the Fed on Wednesday. It was an incredible event. There was a 50 basis point cut, a double rate cut.
Okay.
And then yesterday we were off to the races. We rallied to all-time highs on the S&P, and it was like that's a good time to end. That's why I think we're not really moving much today, because people were like, you know what, let's just sell it and go to the Hamptons.
Maybe we need to be here on a day and just kind of take stock of everything and take a moment, take a breath.
Stock would be a great name for a show.
Used to have about that? We used to have one.
Yeah.
I used to do it. All right, everybody, welcome. It is the Friday edition of Bloomberg Business Week on TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Massar. He's Matt Miller. He's in for Tim Stanovec this week. We got an interesting day. We're going to talk about this in the next couple of hours. But we're going to talk about triple witching. We're going to talk about index rebalancing. But really, Matt, what's top of mind for us in the next 60 minutes is some of the most read stories on the Bloomberg, a story I know that you have talked about or interested in, and that is Microsoft powering down big time when it comes to nuclear.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because, well, I'm a child of the 3 Mile Island era, so for me it means a lot.
Yeah, we remember.
Those reactors have been closed down. The last one closed down in 2019, but Microsoft's going to reopen it with the help of Constellation, and they are going to buy the energy that it produces for the next 2 decades.
Yeah, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And Microsoft is listening all in, not only on nuclear, but also on renewables. So we're going to talk about all of that with Will Wade. Apple's new iPhone, not yet powering up with AI, but maybe you just have to wait a couple weeks for an upgrade, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind
Software upgrade.
I feel like the Worldwide Developers Conference was a little bit of a letdown, and this iPhone is kind of ho-hum, especially since it doesn't even come with AI. Even the AI, I feel like when it rolls out, is going to be itself ho-hum.
All right, we're going to talk about that with Mark Gurman. We're going to talk about Nike running high. Shares certainly are, thanks to a new CEO. We're going to get into the cover story of Bloomberg Business Week, what Kamala Harris would mean for Wall Street and Main Street. And then we're going to get...
Who knows?
We've got a lot to talk about. We're also going to talk about what happens when a comedian and an entrepreneur walk into a business together.
Is there a punchline? Is there a punchline coming?
That's not a great one.
Hassan Minhaj is going to join us. He is hilarious.
All right, we're looking forward to that over the next 60 minutes. First up, though, waiting patiently by is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. Here's what's going on. Do want to begin with a developing story involving B. Riley, said to be in talks to sell its wealth management unit to Stifel for $100 million. That, according to Reuters. Right now, shares of B. Riley, they are surging by 7.8%. Again, headlines right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service, and we will keep you updated as more details become available. Stocks pairing declines after Fed Governor Christopher Waller showed confidence that inflation is coming down, stoking hopes for further rate cuts. Right now, we have got the Dow up 51, a gain of 0.1%. S&P down 13, down 0.2%. NASDAQ right now down 78, a decline there of 0.4%. 10-year 3.73%, the 2-year 3.57%. Gold surging 1.2%, up $32 the ounce to a record 26.18, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, 72.23 a barrel. Federal Trade Commission suing units of CVS, Cigna, and United Health Group, accusing the drug middlemen of engaging in illegal rebate programs that drove up the price of insulin. Shares of CVS down 1.4%. Cigna shares right now, they are down 0.1%, and United Health up by 0.1%. So again, recapping, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ trading mixed, S&P down by about 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. It is time for Bloomberg Business Week. 2 tech names on our radar this first block. First up, let's get to a story which I can safely say Matt and I are pretty obsessed with. It's a most read story in the Bloomberg. It's what I call kind of a wait what moment, the reopening of 3 Mile Island.
Wait, what?
Wait, what? That's exactly what I call it. We're living in unusual times, so let's get to it. Constellation Energy, the owner of the shuttered 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania, investing a ton of money, and it's going to sell the output to Microsoft. So what's going on? Let's check in with Bloomberg. Bloomberg's Will Wade. He is our power and renewable energy editor. And I got to say, we love talking with you. We've talked a lot about the renewal and revival of nuclear. First of all, what do we know about this deal with Microsoft and Constellation?
Okay, so I'm going to start here. It's not that reactor. There's 2 reactors at the 3 Mile Island site. One of them, everyone knows, had an accident in 1979, worst U.S. accident, worst nuclear accident in U.S. history. This is not that one. This is the other one, which ran just fine for like 45 years, and they shut it down in 2019 because it couldn't compete economically. That was the story for nuclear for a long time, that it was expensive and people wanted cheap gas, cheap solar, cheap wind. Nowadays, people can't get enough nuclear.
I didn't understand. First of all, I had to read in to realize that the other reactor was still going. I figured after 3 Mile Island in 1979, after China Syndrome, that they just stopped it.
No,
right?
no,
But they kept, what is it, TMI 1 running, and TMI 2 is the one that melted down, right?
That's right, yes.
But anyway, they were running it till 2019, and then they shut because natural gas was cheaper. I thought the expense in nuclear was the startup costs. But is it really that expensive to keep running?
Nuclear plants are expensive to operate. One of the main reasons is security. They've got tight security, especially after 9/11. They ramped up security.
It's Stuxnet.
Yeah. So that's the cyber threat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're not vulnerable to that.
I forgot to tell you, Will, that Matt was going to be here.
I'm excited because usually I listen to you. Usually I listen to the show. Now I'm a participant.
He's great.
Okay.
So I'm glad to have you on. So it's expensive to operate.
Yeah.
And so it's not this, fantastic solution to carbon-free energy, cheap and plentiful.
Or is it?
Well, it's plentiful, and it does something that wind and solar doesn't do, which is it runs around the clock. 24/7. You get nuclear power all the time. That's what people like, and that's especially what the data centers like. Data centers want to run around the clock because they're just machines. And we've got all these tech companies that in like the last 10 years have come out with all these ambitious green goals, and now they've got data centers and AI, and they need so much electricity, and they're having trouble keeping up with those pledges they made a little while ago. So they think nuclear is the answer to their problems.
Well, back at Milken in May, Microsoft and Brookfield Asset Management, their green energy arm, signed the biggest corporate clean energy purchase agreement ever announced. Microsoft, as it ramps up its investment in AI. So they're looking to do it with renewables. But can the AI world not power everything or get all the power they need through renewables? They're going to have to look at something like nuclear in order to get it done.
Nuclear is renewable?
Well, it is renewable.
Nuclear is clean. It's not renewable.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, right, exactly. But there's a difference.
I thought the idea was you could now power nuclear reactors with waste. Like you could just keep pushing it back through.
You know what? There's some new emerging designs that are going to work on that, but none of them are ready for prime time yet.
But green can't do it alone. Or could it?
Well, that's literally the most important question in energy today. There's a lot of people like the Sierra Club, they're like all over, let's use renewables instead of nuclear. So if you build a whole lot of it, we maybe could.
If you have wind farms covering the entirety of North America.
Well, I don't know if we need that much, but then there's the intermittency problem. They just don't run all the time, and it's not predictable.
Right.
So there's batteries, and batteries can solve that problem, but they're still kind of expensive. So theoretically, it could be done. Practically, it will be hard, and the easy answer is, but let's use nuclear.
Right. I thought what's interesting about this deal is that Constellation is using some of its own money, right?
They're using all of their own money.
Or all of their
it's
own
like
money.
$1.6 billion, and they're going to spend it all out of their own pockets.
But they have a guaranteed customer for 2 decades.
That's the reason why, yeah.
But what does it take what do they have to do to get it up and running? Like, how difficult is that? Or up and running again, I should say.
There's going to be some engineering work. They need new transformers, which are hard to get, but that's a supply chain issue. They need to work on the turbines and the cooling systems. They need to do a lot of maintenance. It's been sitting around for 5 years. But, the CEO, Joe Dominguez, told me yesterday that it's in great shape.
You knew about this beforehand? You had the inside scoop?
I had the inside scoop.
Nice.
Sorry.
He has the inside scoop on all this
By the way,
stuff.
3 Mile Island 2, the second reactor that's been shuttered, decommissioned, I don't know what you call it.
That's the word.
So is that just going to stay there forever? When can they move that and build condos there?
You want a condo there?
I mean, was there really long-term health fallout from 3 Mile Island? It seems to be debated.
No, it was 1979. It was decades ago.
So
the research showed that I don't know, I forget how many thousands of people in the area were exposed to the radiation that was the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
Right.
So nothing, but not deadly. It's being decommissioned, which is a years-long project. Eventually, they're supposed to mitigate the sites and bring them back to nice, clean parks and trees. There's the way
deer with five-legged deer.
There aren't any five-legged deer.
All right, Matthew, stop. All right, so Will, just to wrap up, are we going to see more deals like this? I mean, we talked with you earlier this year about the opening of the first new nuclear reactor in the U.S. in Georgia. Have we definitely turned a corner once again with nuclear, or there's a lot still? I feel like there can be a lot of pushback.
So there's a lot of excitement about more nuclear, and we're hearing people say, let's do this again. Like when I was working on the story, I started getting messages from other editors saying, how many more are there? How can we do more of these? And the answer is not very many. I actually did a story on this a few weeks ago. The people I talked to basically said there's a list of 3 reactors that can be restarted. One of them they're already working on. It's Palisades. It's in Michigan. That's probably going to come online next year, late next year. This is number 2. The third one is NextEra's Duane Arnold plant, which is potentially restartable. NextEra said, we're looking at it. You know, maybe if they get a deal like this, they'd look at it more carefully. Yeah. After that, most of the ones, they're probably not in good enough shape.
Bit of a creep, it sounds like, in terms of moving back towards it. Will Wade, thank you so much. Thanks for putting up with Matt on this and his crazy stuff. Will is our power and renewable energy editor here at Bloomberg. All right, let's get to, I say crazy, but you know I love you.
I'm just a fan, right?
I know.
I heard you doing that first hit, and that was fascinating, I thought. Yeah.
All right, let's get to the other big tech that's on our radar. We're talking about Apple. And it's interesting. We know the new iPhone going on sale, hitting stores, but they're doing so without their biggest new feature. Let's get to Mark Gurman.
Arguably.
Right?
I mean, to me, the biggest new feature is the camera button. Okay. And that's on the phone.
All right, so let's see what Mark Gurman has to say. He's Bloomberg News chief technology correspondent, reports on all things Apple out there in Los Angeles. Were you smirking a little bit at that, or were you like questioning? Tell us your thoughts.
Okay, so there's what Apple is saying the biggest new feature with these new iPhones, and there's what's actually the biggest new feature with these iPhones, and so that's why I was sort of smiling. So you asked Apple, the biggest new feature is Apple Intelligence, which is their suite of AI services that's not launching for about a month from now. The actual biggest new feature, as Matt said, is the camera control button and interface, both in the hardware and software. I'm setting up the new phone right now and looking forward to taking it for a spin. Once it's all set up, right now it's in the process of syncing all my data from my old phone. So I'll have more thoughts soon. But what was really interesting is I was at the flagship store in Los Angeles this morning. It was a much longer than a line that I had anticipated. The videos that you're seeing from different stores around the world, China, Australia, Korea, the lines are outrageous in context for what these upgrades really are. It's not a big upgrade. The AI features are not ready, but people are there anyways. So you're seeing there's a lot of pent-up demand, and you're seeing the power of Apple's marketing engine.
I think it's, I mean, there's some people who just get a new iPhone every year. There's some people who are like my buddy who reports out of Germany, Patrick Donahue.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what happens, what features it's got. He's getting a new iPhone on the day it exists every year. But yeah, even the AI features when they come out, Mark, are they really going to be that capable? Is Siri going to suddenly work the way I expected Siri to work 10 years ago?
No, and it doesn't matter because Apple is a marketing and PR-driven company, and its customers absolutely, like myself and your friend, love the brand. So no, it doesn't really matter. 90% of consumers who get the AI upgrades will know their phone has AI, but not know what AI is. They won't know what the features are, right? And so it honestly, I'm at the point with Apple where it just doesn't matter what they come out with, what they do. The brand is so strong that people are going to upgrade anyways. People love it, and then you have the power of the iPhone upgrade program in the US. You have the power of installment programs. We're at a point with how these carriers work that there's millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of iPhone users who are going to buy a new iPhone every year or every 2 years or every 3 years because they kind of have to because their installment program has run out.
Matt just messaged me. I'm excited for the hearing aids. Having bought hearing aids for my dad a few years ago, and what a process it was, and cumbersome and
expensive, right?
And super expensive. I gotta say, this sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, so here's the benefit of the Apple hearing aids. Very integrated into the iPhone, very easy to set up. You're obviously going to be getting a tech-forward interface. And the cost, these AirPods, I'm wearing them right now, these are $250, right? And there's millions of people who already have the AirPods Pro 2. They went on sale at the end of 2022 that already have hardware that will support this hearing aid functionality, right? There are lots of hearing aids on the market that don't work well with the iPhone or work with technology well. So this is going to avoid that. At $250, this is a different world compared to some of the higher end hearing aids that can cost north of $1,000, $2,000. I've even seen hearing aids that cost almost $3,000, right? So you have that huge benefit there. Now here's the drawback. Many hearing aids can last, several days, right? The AirPods, they'll last 5 hours in your ears. So most people that wear hearing aids don't pop them in and out of their ears. People who are switching to an AirPods hearing aid will have to get used to the idea of only having the hearing aids in their ears when they need them, not keeping them in their ears all day long, because the battery life, it's two different planets. So that's the one thing that I think people haven't talked enough about the battery life. And how actual wearability is going to change.
It is, but also most hearing aids don't come with the cool AirPods case. Like, it's super easy and almost for some reason like fun to put them in and out of the case. And when I got my dad hearing aids, he didn't want to wear them, still doesn't, because he thinks they make him look old, even though he already looks like ancient. But he thinks like it makes him look somehow handicapped.
Yeah.
Wearing AirPods, like the kids wear AirPods all the time. We had a guest on our television show who's a professional who works at one of the big 6 banks. She accidentally wore her AirPods throughout the entire hit because it just looks normal and nobody freaked out about it. So,
no, it's exciting, and I definitely agree with you. I've heard the same about people wearing hearing aids, not liking how they look, and this is going to be a game changer for that. I would say if you compare the pros and cons from an AirPod as a hearing aid to a standard hearing aids, I think these new AirPods blow anything that's been done to date completely out of the water. In fact, I wrote a column last weekend that the biggest announcement from the Apple event on September 9th were these new hearing aid features for the AirPods. It is an absolute game changer for so many people today and so many people tomorrow. And that is the magic of Apple, being able to take technology and commercialize it in a way that no other company can because of how big their ecosystem is and how integrated it is. And don't discount Apple retail stores, and there being over 500 of those globally, and the marketing power of those stores and the reach that those stores have to
such a chill place to hang out.
This is
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
By the way, Mark, I read
hang out at
all of
the
your
Apple
columns, and so this may be a killer app for the AirPods. I know that in terms of the watch, when they can finally measure blood sugar, when's that going to happen?
That's a long way off. I would say before the end of the decade. They've been working on this, believe it or not, since the late 2000s. So before 2010, they kicked off, I think, right before 2010. Steve Jobs, this was the Steve Jobs push, right? And he passed in 2011. So when they bring glucose to market, it could have been a 20-year development project, which would probably be the longest development project, I would say, of any new feature or product from any technology company that we've ever heard of. The first iPhone was a 2.5, 3-year project. 20 years for this. This is, when they do it, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. I think Tim Cook is right when he says health is going to be a big part of his legacy.
Just think about the amount of people, right, that you could tap into, certainly as a market. It's huge. Mark Gurman, you're the best. Have a great weekend. Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman out there in LA. Coming up from Wall Street to Main Street, when a Harris White House would meet. That's next.
2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Red on the screen now with the Dow just turning negative, down 25 points, 42,000 even right now on the S&P, down by about 0.1%. We've got the S&P 500 index down 22, decline there of 0.4%. NASDAQ down 93, decline there of 0.5%, but the NASDAQ 100 index also down 0.5%. Small cap shares are declining. Russell 2000 index lower now by just about 0.7%. 10-year 3.72%, the 2-year 3.57%. Spot gold, though, is surging $34 the ounce to a record $26.21, up by 1.3%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.2%, $71.78 for a barrel of WTI. Right now, again, the S&P down 0.4%. Volkswagen has begun to trim corporate jobs in China as it works to reduce overhead by a target of 20% globally over the next 3 years. ADRs of VW down now by 2.6%. Recapping, stocks lower, the Dow in the red as well, down just under 0.1%. S&P down by 0.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. Let's get to another of the most read stories on the Bloomberg. It's also a story that our editorial team here has singled out as a must-read. That's why we call it the Bloomberg Big Take. It is also the cover story of the upcoming new issue of Bloomberg Business Week, which will be on newsstands on October 15th. And the story gets into the question, what would a Kamala Harris White House mean for everyone and everything from Wall Street to Main Street? So let's get into it. With us is Bloomberg News California Bureau Chief Karen Breslau. She is out there in San Francisco. Karen, I don't know, I guess it's safe to say to some extent, although some would argue that we might know what a second term of a Trump White House might mean because he's already been president. But I don't think we still really know what a White House run by a President Harris would be like. So tell us about what you guys wanted to dig into and how you went about it.
Sure. Our goal was really to have a companion piece to the Business Week Trump cover, which ran in July ahead of the Republican convention. And we didn't have, the Harris campaign didn't provide an interview with her, but
you did have an interview with Trump.
That's correct. Yeah. Absolutely. With our White House team. And so, you know, part of this was, you know, she, in the weeks that we were working on this cover, outlined, she had her convention, she talked about creating an opportunity economy for the middle class, which I think nobody would argue with, but what does that actually mean in terms of policy? And so our goal, working with Josh Wingrove and Akayla Gardner on our White House team, who've been covering Kamala Harris as vice president and on the campaign trail, is to figure out what that means actually in terms of policy. I have the background here in California of having covered Kamala Harris through her rise in California politics as district attorney of San Francisco, as attorney general of California, and then of course she went and won the Senate seat, the junior Senate seat from California in 2017. So we have, you know, we found a lot in her past that we think is relevant for how she would make the complex decisions required of a president when it comes to managing the economy.
I got to ask a question that, you know, Republicans have made a big deal out of Willie Brown. And indeed, the Politico piece on Kamala says it's hard to think honestly about the origins of the rise of Harris without grappling with the reality of the role of Brown. And yet in our story, it doesn't really merit much more than a one-sentence mention. Since you covered her rise, is that because you think Politico is wrong about that? He didn't have a lot of influence in her ascendance?
I think that, first of all, we should identify, you know, Willie Brown was the mayor of San Francisco and briefly a dating partner of Kamala Harris.
But 2 years, right? So that in my life, that's not a brief dating. They started dating in 94 and broke up in 96.
Okay, that's fine. I think if we're going to, you know, talk about an extensive record to go by here in California, and you know, in the Biden administration, I guess my reluctance is that seems like, you know, that's part of a person's history. I think if we're going to talk about dating histories, we would have to talk about the dating histories of all candidates, regardless of gender.
I'm only wondering because Republicans use that as an attacking point, right? So, and if we say there's nothing to see here, move on, it makes people want to see more. I mean, you don't date someone that puts you on a pair of state boards, gives you a BMW. These boards provided her with a salary of, I'm just going by the Politico story here, $400,000. And a lot of Republicans say, I haven't read about it until now, that he really helped push her up the ladder.
I think that had she never won elective office in California, I think that would be a more valid point. But the fact is, she won her first race for district attorney in San Francisco. She ran unopposed in her second term. She won her first race for attorney general of California, squeaked through with under 1%, and then won re-election by a substantial margin, and then won a U.S. Senate seat. So had she, been, let's just say, not met approval of California voters or never presented her qualifications to California voters, then yes, I think you could say, is this somebody who was, who somehow, climbed the ladder with a boost from, an influential elected official and former dating partner. Well, but I think we have to look at her record, having won, let's just count, 5 elections in California. And then, as a vice president, as the Biden-Harris ticket. So, she has a successful record as a candidate. And so that, I think that makes a valid case for looking at her record in office, looking at her, bona fides as a candidate as opposed to her personal history.
And I think it's safe to say, that every political candidate has relationships or people who help them get to their positions. And some of them are deeper relationships, some are not. And some are politics or some are business relationships. Having said that, yeah, go ahead, please, Karen.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the interesting things about Harris is that she came to San Francisco as an outsider. She came from Oakland. She was not part of the clubby Democratic establishment that produced Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, the current governor, Dianne Feinstein, who held California's senior Senate seat for 30 years and died in office last year. California has 39 million people, but the path to power runs through this very clubby world of democratic politics in San Francisco, and she arrived here very much an outsider, and I think that is an interesting dynamic.
And, to be fair, I think if you put a lot of people up there in terms of their personal life, there's a lot we could kind of pick apart potentially.
We do that with presidential candidates.
We do, and sometimes it speaks to, their character. Having said that, I do think the Bloomberg audience also cares about what does either a Trump or Harris president mean in terms of Wall Street or the economy, and it is something that is certainly what we dig into in a big way. What can we walk away from? Because I think there's still, Karen, I think you would agree that there's still a fair amount of questions of, sure. I get the opportunity economy. I'm not quite sure what that means. Like, right. So what are the specifics that we can actually say, okay, Harris is in the White House, this is what it's going to mean?
There are precious few specifics, and that, a lot of this is going to depend, let's just say the Trump tax cuts expire next year. Is she going to have a Democratic Senate to enact any sort of, policy, tax policy that she would favor? We don't know that yet. What we do know, I think, is that her approach to economic policy is not, I wouldn't say it's, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party necessarily. I mean, she's not, an Elizabeth Warren, acolyte, although she served in the Senate with her and did, run against her for the 2020 nomination, Democratic nomination, and both failed, obviously. But what we do know is that she tends to use regulatory power, I would say, selectively. We did see that as Attorney General of California. It's not so much, an anti-corporate ideology as it is this a level playing field? Who is being harmed by, let's say, by illegal or collusive behavior? Is it startups? Is it low-income, mortgage holders who were harmed by the subprime lending crisis? Is it let's say adult learners who are enrolled in a for-profit college?
Right.
One of her biggest settlements was against Corinthian College here in California, which had defrauded a number of students, of adult learners. And so I think that, it's very hard to pin the dogma on her. And she tends to be quite pragmatic and evidence-based. I mean, she really approaches. I talked to a number of people who said she looks at policy the way she does a prosecutor would look at a court case. What is the evidence? What's my theory of the case? How far does the evidence take me?
Well,
Is there new evidence?
when she, because that's her background, when she shifts her position on something, what's your read on it? Did she get some new evidence? Like what, or is it?
Yeah.
Listen,
She also seemed to
it's
have
politics.
a pretty dogmatic position in the Senate, right? If you go by VoteView, which is the project out of UCLA that kind of ranks people, and you could quibble on how what a good job they do on that, but they say in her 2 terms, 320 votes, only Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were to the left of her. In fact, since 1864, only 15 senators in their voting recorurs have been ranked to the left of her by VoteView. So she's pretty liberal in that respect.
In the Senate, that's right. And it was 2 years, not 2 terms. She was
Sorry, 2
office
Senates, the
fairly 2
116th
years.
and the
That's right.
117th Senate.
Yeah. So I think what has been frustrating, to covering, to trying to discern the policy details of her economic plan, is that she doesn't let herself be pinned down. She has learned, I think, from her time in the Senate, where we didn't see great legislative strides, which is hard to do as a freshman senator in your first 2 years, period. But we also saw when she tried to run hard left in her bid for the 2020 nomination, and really got tangled up. I just don't think that's her, and it doesn't reflect her record in California in law enforcement. Obviously, it's quite different as a legislator. So we're comparing a law enforcement record to a Senate record to a record with a less liberal president. To now, she's the front runner, and she's got basically, she's had basically she's running a snap election.
Right.
And so ambiguity, I think the ambiguity the campaign thinks is to her advantage. She is appealing to swing voters, to blue class, voters, to disaffected Republicans.
Got it.
I don't think she's going to say or do anything, radical or ultra progressive at this point.
We got to run. Karen, thank you so much. Bloomberg News California Bureau Chief Karen Breslau. This is the cover story of the upcoming new issue of Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A retreat for the U.S. stock market. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. The underlying benchmark fresh off its 39th record of 2024 after some disappointing earnings reports this morning. Case in point, FedEx plunging 13.9%, and also Lennar, the home builder, down 4.7%. S&P right now down 27 to 56.86, a drop there of 0.5%. The Dow, which had been higher last update, now down 92 points, down 0.2%, while NASDAQ is lower today by 0.6%, down 105. 10-year, 3.72%, with a 2-year that's yielding 3.57%. Gold up $33 the ounce to $26.20 for the precious metal, an advance right now of 1.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil just about flat on the day, 71.92 a barrel. The shuttered 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania is coming back. The plant's owner, Constellation Energy, will be investing $1.6 billion to revive it, agreeing to sell all the output to Microsoft as the tech titan seeks carbon-free electricity for data centers to power the AI boom. Right now, Constellation shares are surging by 21%, Microsoft down by 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, everybody. So when it comes to foreign policy, the U.S. has sought to cultivate a deeper partnership with India. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. There are about 4.8 million Indian Americans in the United States. That's according to some Census Bureau data. Indian Americans account for 20% of the nation's Asian American population overall. 2/3 of Indian Americans are immigrants. 34% are U.S. born, and around half of Indian Americans live in 4 U.S. states: California, Texas, New Jersey, and New York.
So many numbers, Carol.
I know. Well, I want to give a little bit of a sense because these guys are thinking a lot about that community. Reaching out to the community are our next 2 guests. We're welcome and delighted to have with us actor comedian Hassan Minhaj. Forgive me. Minhaj.
This is all good.
So,
we're live.
we are
live here on Bloomberg TV.
Hassan Minhaj, along with Anya Sanyal, who co-founded Kolkata Chai Company with his brother. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So great to have you here with us. Anya, I want to start with you because tell us about Kolkata. And our producer, Cece, has been down to the Soho location, says it's incredible, very good. You have 2 in New York City. Tell us about how it all came together.
Yeah, so 5 years ago, my brother and I decided to do the craziest thing possible, which is bring authentic chai to America. We grew up being able to travel back to India a lot, and New York City, you can find anything you want to eat and drink, but it was really hard to find a good cup of chai. So that's where we started. We opened 6 months before the pandemic. We bootstrapped our first cafe location, which I don't recommend, but 5 years later, we are at 3 locations. We just brought on, one of the more generational talents in this country to join the business, and we're super excited.
Hassan, how did you get involved in it?
So funny enough, I had heard about the cafe for a long time. Getting a great cup of chai is kind of somewhat of a secret in our community. You talk about where you can get a great cup. I had heard about the cafe over in Nolita, and then funny enough, my wife put me onto it. I get back home, I open one of our drawers, and it's filled with KCC.
Seriously?
Yeah, and she goes, "Have you had Kolkata chai?" And I go, "Yeah, I've heard about it. Is it the real deal?" And it became Bina approved, and therefore it became Hassan approved. And then I went down to the location, their location. They're celebrating their 5-year anniversary this week. But I went down to the Nolita location, and I saw the community that they've built. They now have 3 cafes, and of course they obviously have the incredible D2C business, and they've built this amazing omni-channel platform. And me and Ani got to chatting, and a lot of times, celebrities, we get asked to participate, and hey, you should endorse this product.
Right.
And what they'll do is they'll use your name and likeness, and they'll white label you with some commodity, tequila, sneakers, T-shirts, and that's great. I've done that.
Or you
before.
drink it on the Patriot Act.
Sure.
Or
yeah.
show.
Or you talk about the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 by Verizon 5G, the fastest 5G network available, right? I've done that commercial.
But this is different.
This is different. This is something where I genuinely loved the brand. I loved what they had been building, and I wanted to authentically tell our story through tea. Tea is one of the largest markets that's growing right now, and getting a great cup of chai has been something that in our community we've always wanted, and they really cracked the code. Not only just from their brick and mortar business, but the fact that they broke the code with the masala chai concentrate.
Right.
So when I was having that great cup of tea at their location in Nolita, I was like, wait, this same cup can be here in New York City. I can have it in the Midwest. You know, you can have it wherever across the country, which was like that was the aha moment for me.
My good friend Kriti Gupta used to make me chai and bring it into work, and then unfortunately she was transferred to London. So now, like, I'm in the market. What is the secret to making it really truly authentic?
Yeah, what's the Coca-Cola recipe?
I wish I could. No, the secret is my brother. He's the head chef, and he's figured out the perfect blend of tea, spice, and a little bit of sugar to get that sweet and spicy balance. We source all of our tea from legacy tea estates in Assam in India. So this is where 100 years ago they planted tea, 200 years ago they started planting tea, and so all of our product is coming from that region. So we're talking about the most authentic, unfiltered product that you can find.
What Paris is for fashion, I would say Assam is for tea. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Ani, how big is the market? I have a daughter who loves it, was in Tanzania, brought it back, loved it. So tell me how big the market is and tell us a little bit about the business.
Yeah, so in the U.S., the packaged tea market is about a $15 billion category.
Right.
But it's growing slowly because tea is a little bit sleepy. However, you have these modern formats like matcha, which is actually growing at a 10% CAGR. And so we see ourselves as that next iteration of matcha. You mentioned, the growing Asian American population in this country, and that is fueling this need for people to want to have the real thing. We don't want to go to, the takeout spots or the fast food spots. We want that real, authentic, from the source product. And so that's really where we're excited about chai as a new category. And our business, so we've grown 300% year over year. So we are on a rocket ship right now. Top line revenue. And that's accelerated by our direct-to-consumer business and our e-commerce products. So we do...
Is that where most of the business is, and that's where the...
That is where most of the revenue is, yep. So we use our brick-and-mortar locations as community building and product introduction to the market, since chai is relatively new, and then we accelerate that growth on direct-to-consumer. And so we have a best-in-class chai mix, which is like a tea and spice mix, and we do a liquid concentrate product, which Hassan alluded to as well. Yeah. And you can make chai in 30 seconds at home, so we're going to get you right.
But what you guys were talking about was exactly the problem that they solved. Hey, I had a colleague that put me onto this great cup of chai. My daughter came back and gave me this great cup of chai. And the difficulty has always been is how do you package and product this great experience that you had somewhere in Tanzania or somewhere in Delhi or in Mumbai or in Assam, and how do you get it to the break room?
Yeah, without having to go. You don't want to go to Starbucks and get the chai tea latte.
I'm not here to throw shade on any other places, but what KCC has also done, which is historical, is they're the first storefront location for a chai cafe. So this thing that is
different.
Yeah, that has a deep resonance in our culture. It was usually relegated to like a side item that you would get at a restaurant, but this is like a true brick and mortar storefront and an omni-channel business.
What do you do to grow it? So what's the plans? Is it more stores? Is it more omni-channel?
You bringing him on to grow it, right?
Or do you also like?
What's the new movie? It ends with us.
It ends with us.
Drink a cup of tea and it ends with us.
Yeah. Number one movie at the box office.
There we go.
But also like bringing it into other big retail.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I think right now our growth is happening on direct-to-consumer and e-commerce, so that's really where we're dialing in. New product formats, new ways of advertising and telling that story. I think having Hassan, generational storyteller, bringing chai to mainstream America through that type of format, through that pop culture format, that's what we're really excited about. And then to your point about retail expansion, being in grocery stores, that's the next step for us. We want to be accessible to all Americans.
For me personally, it was about a healthier caffeine alternative to coffee.
Is there no caffeine?
There's caffeine, but there's not to get too scientific, but there's L-theanine in it, which is almost like a cleaner, kind of healthier sort of kick that you get from chai. So and also for people where if coffee's giving you a little bit of a rumble in the tumble, it's messing with your tummy a little bit. Chai is a great alternative to that. And so for me, I think people really want the real thing, and they want a healthier alternative to coffee or espresso.
And did you give some to Blake Lively? I mean, you passing it on to people who aren't Indian? You want
to me, chai fundamentally is about community, family, commiseration. It's like intrinsically linked to joy and being together. And so, like, to me, the X factor to me was, why isn't this having its yerba mate or matcha moment? And I think it really is about to have that.
All right, this was almost perfect. It would have been perfect if you had brought us a cup, but...
Did you want a cup? We could have plugged it.
I'm just saying. Hassan Minhaz and Anis Sanyal, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Kolkata Chai Company. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you.
Super surprised by the move.
So the stock has done very poorly. If you compare it to any of the other sneaker makers, I think even Adidas has outperformed Nike. So that's difficult to underperform Adidas over the last 5 years. What's been the real problem?
The real problem is that Nike let others encroach on its space. So when Nike pulled out of Foot Locker in a meaningful way, people didn't have access to Nike, right? The consumer, if you think about the United States, where do people shop? People still shop at these athletic wear stores. And now when you walk into a Foot Locker, sure, you see Nike, but if you had walked into a Foot Locker 5 years ago in 2019, it would be flooded with Nikes. It would be largely Nike. Today, I see an equalizer where there's a section for Nikes, there's a section for Jordan, there's On, there's Hoka, and Adidas, and everything else, right? So it's a more balanced play. And that means that people have choices. When you give people choices, people will try new things. They'll like new things. And Nike kind of let that happen.
All right. So is this new guy, old new guy?
Is he going to turn that around?
Is he the answer? Can he make, because sometimes you have to go, you don't want to bring back old folks, you want to go to new folks. But I'm just curious what you think, that is he the answer?
Look, I think it's a very good choice. He's been at the company for over 30 years. He knows Nike's DNA. He's a merchant. He's been in the consumer segment there most recently. And it really, Nike just needs to go back to its DNA. It needs to think about product first, right? Product is the cornerstone of Nike. It's not being online. Yes, we'd like them to be online, but at the end of the day, product is what sells, and they need to go back to product, performance, and innovation. And I think we'll see that, but it will take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
You know, Carol and I are friends with this woman, Mindy Grossman, who used to work at Nike, and she's told us a story of when somebody in the boardroom said, "We need to sell more shoes to women," and they all looked at her because she was the only woman there. I noticed that this guy is a dude, and the last guy was a dude,
Are you
and
saying is that
the guy
part of the
before that
problem?
was a dude.
Is that
Like,
part of the problem?
Yeah, have they thought about, like,
We
you know,
women shop a lot, or
diversity
so I hear.
at all?
Sources say we shop a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think diversity is in every board meeting that you go to today, and it is definitely a topic of discussion. But at the end of the day, you really need someone who knows the Nike DNA. And it's unfortunate that there weren't that many women involved from the beginning. But right now, I think the person sitting at the top needs to be someone that understands what Nike needs to do to move forward. That said, could more women be involved at Nike? Absolutely. Is women's a growth market for them? Yes, and for every other retailer. And every retailer that I talked to today is focusing on women's. And it's a category that's anyone's game.
Yeah, it just
that
seems
Nike
like
doesn't need in women's.
women's basketball is picking up. Women's soccer is picking up. You know, we talked to the betting houses. More women are laying bets on sports. Like, it's and they make shopping decisions on occasion for the family.
Or
You know?
so I hear, sources say. Just real quickly, though, did we even talk about China? Do we need to talk about China? 30 seconds left here.
China matters, it always will, but China is a flaky market right now, and it's not going to be the reason the Nike outperforms. So it's a wait and watch story, but it's definitely a growth story in the longer term.
All right, Poonam, what sneakers do you wear?
I wear Nikes.
Okay, I was just checking. And right on holding are not nerdy sneakers.
I feel like, you know what the thing about Nike is, I've always thought
I love on holding.
they're still going to be king of the hill. It doesn't matter how many Reeboks or British Knights or On Holdings or Hoka or Skechers come along. Still Nike is the king of the hill, right?
Is he right? 10 seconds.
He is right. It's a $50 billion brand. Nothing compares to Nike. It's still the largest.
All right, Poonam, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Bloomberg Intelligence, Senior Analyst for E-commerce, Athleisure, and Off-Price Retail. That is really my world.
Off-price retail is what you like?
E-commerce, athleisure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes.
Lululemon lady.
All right, for those who are watching on television, the close is coming your way in just a moment. Matt and I continue on radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, that was a fun 60 minutes.
Yes, it was.
Right?
Yeah, I always have fun with you. That's why I try and fill in every time Tim Stenevec goes out. But next week, someone else is going to take this seat.
You guys keep me on my toes. What can I tell you? All right, Carol Masser along with Matt Miller. Folks, we're just 60 minutes away from wrapping up the Friday trade and wrapping up the week. What a week it's been. We're on radio, TV, YouTube. No, not on TV right now, but we're going to come back to TV in just a moment. Bloomberg Originals. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about FedEx fumbling just a little bit. We got that news after the close.
Yeah, that's my one decliner that I've got so far.
There's several decliners.
Yeah, I know. It's
right.
I think it was like a sell in May and go away day.
Working
today.
on that list. We're also going to hear from the Ford CEO on EVs in China. Sue Duke is head of global policy at LinkedIn. We're going to get into the greening of the workforce. And Matt, are you focused
on? You mean just in general?
Yeah.
Because I did take 2 Advil cold and sinuses earlier, so I'm pretty
Well,
focused.
this is my concern. We're going to talk about hyper efficiency and optimizing your brain to transform the way you work.
I am. I've got the book right here.
Well done, well done. We're also going to get into the 50 best hotels in the world this year. So get at your pen and pad. All right, first up, let's get a check on the trade. Let's get back to Charlie Pellet.
All right, thank you very much. We move into the final hour of trading. A lot of red on the screen right now. We've got the S&P 500 index down 15, declining 0.3%. Dow lower, little change now, down 14 points at 42,015. We've got NASDAQ down 60, a drop there of 0.3%. Stocks did pair declines after Fed Governor Christopher Waller showed confidence that inflation is coming down, stoking hopes for further interest rate cuts. We've got the S&P, as I mentioned, lower. It is off of its 39th record high of 2024. Again, the 10-year yield, right now we have got the 10-year at 3.72%. The 2-year, 3.57%. Gold surging $35 the ounce, up 1.4%, 26.21 record for gold, while West Texas Intermediate crude just about flat on the day, 71.92 a barrel. FedEx shares are plunging. We've got FedEx lower today. FedEx right now down 13.9% after last night's earnings report. But Cameron Dawson, the chief investment officer at New Edge Wealth, is cautioning against reading too much into the economic implications of FedEx.
I think it is tempting to extrapolate because FedEx has often been lauded as a great economic indicator. But it's important to remember that there's been a lot of idiosyncratic issues with FedEx on execution, as well as the fact that there's still a big overhang from the supply chain bullwhip effect that's still affecting their business.
Dawson was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television. So again, recapping, it is a down day for Matt Miller. Today's decliners include Microsoft, Amazon, Mercedes, Lennar, KB Homes, CVS, Cigna, and United Health. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Now you are up to date on the markets. Triple witching, index rebalancing. There's a lot going on, Matt Miller.
Yeah, I'm always, you know what? There were times in my career when I've gotten super pumped up for triple witching for the options expiry, and it never seems to really move the needle in a meaningful way.
$5 trillion of
I think
derivatives
it's just something
contracts.
that the stocks team likes to write about every month, or every quarter.
Hey, nice way to sell the next segment, kiddo.
Well, is it about triple witching?
Actually, I don't care, because whatever she says is always fascinating. Let's get to Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle. Truly, like you make us think about the markets. You get into the specifics. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. So make the case.
I don't think she disagrees with me. You don't disagree with me, right?
I
actually agree with you completely.
When I was on, Abby and I were on TV this morning, and the S&P was off a quarter percent. Right now, the S&P is off a 0.25%. I mean,
there's one notable exception. Thank you so much, Carol, for your kind words. The triple witching back in March of 2020, that was around the time of like that massive sell-off. So that was really the
What else happened in March of 2020?
Yes, but that was the flush of that sell-off.
Yeah.
I think that Monday and then that Tuesday were down, and then we were off to the races. It kind of reset the table. Since then, to my memory, we really haven't seen an exciting triple witching. It's more volume.
Are markets just more efficient? They just handle it all better? What is it? Why do we talk about it then?
Well, I think because of the name triple witching, it sounds kind of cool. I think that there are times when it can happen, sort of, like Black Monday and those sorts of events don't happen very often, but just the possibility of it, I think sets the reason for why people may care and talk about it in that way. The thing that stands out to me the most with triple witching is volume. There's just big volume, both, on the open, and then if I were to pull up the S&P 500, AVAT right now, it's going to be crazy at the time of the open. I'm just waiting for it to open. Yeah, so it was 400% above the 20-day average. So that's really the big effect. We did start to have some wobbles early, midday.
That's pretty interesting, by the way, for Friday.
That kind of volume?
Yeah, because...
Yeah, well, that's the most interesting thing each time about triple witching. I mean, for a moment when the S&P 500 was down 0.5%, and you know what, there's, almost an hour of trading left. We could still get wobbly into the close. The thing that stands out to me probably the most right now, looking at the indexes on the week, the S&P 500, how much would you both guess that it's up? Although you probably already know the
like
answer.
a percent?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
I did hear something.
I have it in front of 1.26%.
Yes.
I looked at it before you came in here, but
yes, and so based on the rally yesterday and just the tenor, the way that the week felt, I wouldn't have been surprised if it was 2 or 3%. And actually, it is 2% for the NASDAQ 100, and it's 3% for the Russell 2000.
What about a SOX index?
The SOX, let's
been
pull
on
that
fire.
up right now.
By the way, what do you think about my theory? I'm sure you heard me talking about this morning, that it's such a big week. We got ramped up for the Fed.
The SOX, it's actually down on the week.
That's pretty shocking. But
it's
last
actually
week
down
it was up 10%. The week before that, it was down 12%.
So the SOX is a
SOX
leading
pretty
tell.
volatile.
That's pretty interesting. Yes, it is very volatile.
So my theory that, it was such a big week. We put so much energy into the Fed. We ended up getting the big, double downgrade or double rate reduction. And then yesterday we had such an amazing rally that I feel like a lot of traders thought, all right, you know what? I'm up 1-2%. gonna get neutral and go into the weekend.
You know,
already.
that makes a lot of sense what you're saying for sure. And yesterday on Open Interest, Amy Wu Silverman joined you and Shanali and basically said that her clients going into the Fed were saying that they thought there could be a big rally out of it, but then that the rally would reverse some weakening. And I think that we're seeing some moderation. You know, we're certainly seeing some moderation today with the S&P 500 down 0.3%. The transports, the Dow transports, which we don't talk about a lot, are down more considerably, down 3.4%.
Can I raise my hand?
Yeah.
If Tim was here, he would ask about Apple.
Apple.
And the reason I want to bring it up, because we do have a story by our Lu Wang.
I thought you were going to talk about Dow theory.
I know, I thought you were about to as well.
No. But there's a story by our Lu Wang that talks about how Apple's going to win big as $250 billion of index trades hits Wall Street. And I guess Piper Sandler came out and just talked about what's happening today and talking about some of the different weighting in the benchmarks, and that because of Warren Buffett's recent share sale, that Apple's weighting is going to be increased in some key benchmarks, and that they really stand to win big
because
time
of
today.
Warren Buffett's sale. Wait, because of his sale, Apple's going to be increased in benchmarks?
I'm not sure I totally understand
doesn't
this.
make sense to me. So I, of course, am starting with the chart. The chart's really pretty messy here. It points to the idea that
Because Apple's up
nobody
about
knows.
1% here.
Yes, Apple's up about 1%. On the week, up about 4%. What's so interesting is at the beginning of the week, Apple was down 3% because of the report of weak sales for the iPhone 16. So there's lots of chop in terms of both the trading and the stories. In terms of whether or not Apple's going to get a greater weighting in the S&P 500, that, unless, to my knowledge, that happens if and when the price goes higher, because then it sort of happens on a natural, organic basis. In terms of Warren Buffett selling shares.
Yeah, it's a good point. So Apple's weighting, I'm reading Lu Wang's previous reporting. Apple's weighting in a slew of benchmarks has been depressed for years because Buffett tends to hold his investment for the long run, making them unavailable for trading.
So there you
you're
go.
Right.
So there's more supply, right?
Yeah.
And so there's more around.
Yep. And so they'll
Abigail's scratching her head over there.
rebalanced up. But I think here's the key to this is this story came out on August 9th. So if
it's already been
institutions are
happening.
they're going to try and get ahead of the rebalancing, which is why we don't see these huge swings on days like today.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And Piper's coming out saying that there's going to be tech names expected to see $40 billion of net buying, with Apple making up the bulk. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there.
Well, let's not forget, in about 3 weeks, we'll be in the heart of earnings season, so we'll get to find out what the numbers actually are. Not that Netflix is necessarily considered to be in that group anymore, but they will kick it off in terms of earnings, and then the Apples, the Microsofts, the Metas. The big question is whether or not they're going to put up their growth. I mean, something that was interesting, and we talked about it the other morning on Open Interest, Microsoft on the year is up a mere, actually it's up a little bit more now, it's up 16%. It had been up 12%. The year doesn't feel that way. It feels like a year when all of big tech is up 20, 25, 30, 50, 60%. So these companies have to put up some numbers. You know, they have to put up some growth, double-digit growth, and that's not necessarily
It's tough to move the needle at this level. I mean, it's a $3.5 trillion company. You talk about $40 billion. That's 1% of Apple's market cap.
I get it. It's kind of a show me quarter.
A show me quarter.
Did you know that I have a TV show on Bloomberg Television?
I gotta tell you,
every weekday from 9 a.m. to 11.
You're gonna owe me big time, because the amount of promotion you have done. Not that I'm not happy to
Did you know that I have a podcast with Hannah Elliott? It's called Hot
in the
Pursuit.
control room, can you just shut his mics right now? All right, Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much, as always, with whether or not you should care about triple witching, because it sounds like maybe you shouldn't.
No, unless we're in the heart of a pandemic. You know, economies around the world are shutting down. Then,
all right,
pay attention.
She's Bloomberg Markets correspondent. Be sure to catch her on all of our platforms. All right,
but especially Open Interest.
Stop.
Okay.
You owe me. You owe me. Every time you say open interest, or I don't know. All right, let's talk a little bit about FedEx. You want to do that?
Yes.
All right, it's down about 14%. We talked about it after the close yesterday, selling off. This has warnings that its business would slow in the year ahead, an ominous sign about maybe what it tells us about the U.S. economy. So let's talk about it with Thomas Black. He's Bloomberg Opinion columnist. He covers manufacturing, logistics, and aerospace with us from Dallas. Thomas, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing okay, doing well on this Friday. FedEx shares, though, unless you're, a bear or shorting it, you're not too happy. Stock's down about 14%. What do we need to know about what we got from the company, which we know has been going through some changes?
Yes, in fact, kind of had a pincer effect in which the market was weak. We kind of knew that coming in, but maybe it was a little bit weaker than we expected, especially on the trading down to slower modes of transportation that are less expensive. And then on the cost-cutting side, they didn't quite meet what people were expecting. They did not change their target on that, so they think they're going to make that up in the back half of the year. In fact, that's probably a theme for the FedEx earnings, is that we kind of cut our guidance a little, not a ton, because we're going to make up a lot in the back half of the year.
How much is this, how much does it reflect on the U.S. economy? Because we also had this kind of warning from UPS earlier. So the idea is, if these companies that ship pretty much everything, I can only think of 3 ways to ship stuff: FedEx, UPS, and the Postal Service. If 2 out of 3 are having problems, and we know that the post office perpetually has problems, then isn't that a bad sign for growth?
It is. You got to remember, they kind of divide up the package deliveries in residential or consumer packages and in industrial, or B2B, they like to say in the industry. So we probably saw B2B weaker than the residential. So that probably tells you something right there. We know from PMI that the industrial economy has been sagging for a while now, right? But there was some weakness on the consumer side, and there was a lot of the trading down, again, going for the cheaper mode of transportation that may take a little while or doesn't have a definite day when it's going to get there.
Remember when everybody said, the e-commerce play was going to be all the shippers and that they, just no way could lose? I'm also looking at UPS shares. They're down almost 3% in today's trade. FedEx woes, are they UPS's woes? Which we know they are not apples to apples when you look at the shipping companies. But if what we're hearing from FedEx, are we likely to see some issues at UPS?
On the broader market themes, yes, there's going to be that same pattern of weakness on the business side a little bit more than perhaps on the residential. That's what I would presume. Of course, UPS isn't going through the major changes that FedEx is doing by combining its 2 networks. The other thing about UPS is that it had a labor contract in which it was front loaded. So a lot of the wage increases were the highest part of the wage increases came in the first year, and then they're going to be it's going to do a valley down in the second and third and fourth year, and then it picks back up a little bit in the 5th year on that labor contract that they signed. So they have just lapped that in August. So now they're coming into that lower labor cost portion of the contract, and that should help some margins. And they're also going through some cost cutting, and UPS is always looking for efficiencies, right? Because they have that unionized workforce that's costly. So they are a highly efficient company, but they've been that way for a long time because they've been unionized since almost the beginning of the company's history.
How much are people and businesses no longer focused on getting it there tomorrow morning? During the pandemic, we were getting everything online, and so we wanted to order it now and get it yesterday. But is that no longer a concern?
I think it's still a service advantage, but the cost of it is where you have to make that equation to say, okay, is it worth it for me to get it there faster to the customer and please them, or is it going to cost me too much and I'm going to lose margin? So I'm gonna ask the customer respectfully that maybe we could slow this down and might even give them a break as well too. I think we're going through that period, yes. Especially inflation has been a big bite on everybody, right? The consumers and businesses. So they're probably in penny pinching mode, if you will, right now. So maybe that's part of the equation. Who knows if we have a soft landing and we take off again and we're flush with cash, they'll want it there in 2 hours, right?
Hey, Thomas, your world, manufacturing, logistics, and aerospace, tells so much about the global economy. In 40 seconds or so, or a minute or so, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what does it tell us about the global economy? What does it tell us about the U.S. economy?
Well, I think where logistics really is impacted are some of these geopolitical hot fires we have, right? The Suez Canal is still mostly blocked for containerized type ship. There is some shipping activity going through there, but most of them are going around there. Those are major impacts, and they do add cost as well too. So some things like that where you can't fly over Russian aerospace, but maybe Chinese airlines can. Those little small differences can make a big impacts on companies. So.
Are there competitors, by the way, other than UPS and the Postal Service? I mean, for consumer, probably not much, but for B2B, I guess there are, right?
We don't have much time, but there's a regional carrier that has kind of gone national. It's on track. It's still small. It's private equity held, but they're trying to make a play to go more national. And there's a lot of startups that do gig type deliveries. So those have clung on. I thought a lot of them would die out. Some of them have, but some have clung on and are still there. It's not quite sure if they're making money,
right?
Because they're privately held, but there are some alternatives now. It's kind of a patchwork. And some of the large shippers that have more control over their warehousing and so forth, they've kind of quilted a patchwork of these small regionals, but it's still small volume.
Thomas Black, thank you so much. Bloomberg Opinion columnist. You can also get an Uber and just put your package in there and send it on its way.
TaskRabbit, come get this.
All right, coming up next, green skills for the global climate workforce. That's coming up on Bloomberg.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. Would you check markets all day long here at Bloomberg? And we begin with a rapidly developing story. Headline right off the Bloomberg professional service: Qualcomm has approached Intel about a takeover in recent days. That, according to the Wall Street Journal. Right now, we are looking at a trading halt on shares of Intel. However, we have got Qualcomm down 3.5%. Last trade, though, on Intel was up by 5.9%. Again, this headline bears repeating: Qualcomm approaching Intel about a takeover in recent days. That, according to the Wall Street Journal. Headline right now on the Bloomberg. We are working on getting reaction to this developing story. The Dow higher on that word, up by 14 points. Intel a member of the Dow. Right now we got the S&P down 9, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index slumping 35, down by 0.2%. 10-year 3.72%, with a 2-year 3.57%. Spot gold up 1.4%, higher by $36 the ounce, 26.22. And West Texas Intermediate crude lower a little change, down 3 cents, 71.92 for a barrel of WTI. Again, repeating our top story, developing story: Qualcomm has approached Intel about a takeover in recent days. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. And again, we are continuing to watch that story. Again, as we mentioned, a headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal from the Wall Street Journal about Qualcomm said to have approached Intel about a takeover in recent days. And again, we see shares of Intel stopped volatility as a result of the stock soaring about almost 6% here.
It's
You've
so
got
interesting
Qualcomm
because
down.
Intel obviously is in this serious position of weakness, right? It's like a $90
absolutely.
billion company, and Qualcomm is like a $200 billion company. So it's considerably larger, more than twice the size.
Right.
And yet, Intel has had a pretty good week in terms of the news flow, right? They got allowance for $3.5 billion more in help, a Pentagon contract, and they got a new customer in Amazon with an AWS contract to make a new fabric chip. So it looks like this week things are going well for Intel, but they have had a very bad year, down 60%. And as a result, you can understand why Pat Gelsinger would at least he would take the phone call. Right?
Absolutely. And we've talked with Ian King about where Intel is today as a result of problems that have been in the year, kind of years in the making.
The shares are trading again, and they're now up 8%.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on that, guys, for more and get you some more analysis. Having said that, one of the other things we want to talk about next week is Climate Week. We've got the UN General Assembly in session. Climate will be a big topic for discussion. Again, we're going to be covering it big time here at Bloomberg. With that in mind, our next guest has been tracking really global demand for green talent and the skills that are needed to meet that demand. Back with us is Sue Duke, Head of Global Policy over at LinkedIn, with us from Dublin, Ireland. Hey, good to have you here, Sue, once again with Matt and me on this Friday. Before we start, what are you seeing, though, about the global labor market generally? Does it feel tight still? Does it still feel pretty active? Are there any signs of weakness? Because that, we know, as a result of the Fed meeting this week, certainly front and center for the U.S. Central Bank.
Yeah, we are seeing increased slack coming back in the labor market in the US. We had seen some signs of stabilization earlier in the year, but the pace of hiring has slowed again, certainly through those last months of the summer. But while we do see employers continuing to be cautious with hiring, we are seeing workers looking for new opportunities, getting more active. The number of applications is up. The number of applicants per application is up, and we do expect to see that surge to continue, particularly in September, when people have that back to school feeling, are back thinking about what's next and start looking for new opportunities.
What kind of pace do you think we're going to see this labor market move at over the next few months? Because there has been commentary. Michael Ferroli from JP Morgan was on the close yesterday saying that he thinks the Fed could cut another 50 basis points at their next meeting in November if, and that's like the operative word in this sentence, the labor market continues to weaken.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here. What we've seen historically is that typically there has been a lag between a cut and the labour market impact of that cut manifesting. But it'll be very interesting to see if that cut or future cuts come. Does that give businesses who really have been hunkering down, does it give them the confidence that leads them either not to do some layoffs that they were considering or indeed to start hiring and expanding a bit more? That's what we'll be watching for.
So let's talk a little bit about the green workforce and what you're finding. As we mentioned, it's Climate Week next week. We've got the UN General Assembly. It's certainly climate is going to be a big discussion there. It's also Bloomberg is doing a live event about the Earth Shot that we often do every year. And so we'll be talking a lot about climate change. What are you seeing in terms of demand for a green workforce? And what exactly does that mean? And what skills does it require?
That demand for green skills continues to buck that broader trend that we see in the economy, that slowing in hiring that we've just been talking about, not when it comes to hiring for green skills. We continue to see that demand not just be resilient, but grow. In the US alone, we saw the demand for green skills increase 10% in the last 12 months alone. And at the current rate, what that means is that if we keep going the way we're going, by 2050, we're going to have twice as many jobs requiring green skills as we're going to have workers with green skills out there. And what we see coming through very clearly, particularly in the US, is the demand for skills related to energy efficiency and skills related to green energy really surging strongly. Building performance, sustainable sourcing, they're the number one and number two fastest growing green skills in the US. And when it comes to green energy, we see solar in particular surging through, particularly in some of those southern states.
You know, there was a great story today that Microsoft and Constellation are going to get the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor up and running again, and Microsoft's going to buy electricity from that for a couple of decades. When you think of green, Sue, does nuclear come into your thinking? Is that considered green in your world?
Yeah, when we're looking at what are the skills that are required to make this transition, we're looking at workers who are acquiring those skills and what industries they're moving into. And nuclear, along with those green energy, solar, wind, we continue to see real growth and real resilience across the board there as we see companies looking to bring that energy on stream, build out this infrastructure, and increasingly looking for the talent that's going to enable them to do that.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. So appreciated. Sue Duke, back with us, Head of Global Public Policy at LinkedIn, joining us from Dublin, Ireland. Do want to remind you that one of our top stories, so much for a sleepy Friday, the Wall Street Journal, Qualcomm making a takeover approach to Intel in recent days. That's according to people familiar with the matter. I'm looking at a tweet from the Wall Street Journal. As a result, you've got Intel shares right now up about 7% in today's trade. Qualcomm shares, meantime, are down about 3.6%. So again, something that we're all of a sudden focusing on this Friday afternoon. Meantime, continuing to also focus on politics. Mark Robinson, he is the Republican candidate for governor in North Carolina, vowing to stay in the race shortly before CNN published a report detailing offensive comments allegedly made by Robinson in online porn forums. Well, recent polls show that Robinson is lagging behind Josh Stein. He's the Democratic Attorney General in that gubernatorial race. North Carolina, we know, an important state, a swing state, so closely watched in the upcoming election. Right now on Bloomberg Radio and Television, Bloomberg surveillance co-host Anne-Marie Hordern sitting down with the sitting North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper.
Audiences from North Carolina at the Governor Mansion with Governor Roy Cooper. Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg TV.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Your state is getting more interesting by the day, and it's really in focus now given this explosive report overnight from CNN about the sitting Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson. He's also the gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side. Salacious, explicit, very offensive words he was using on a porn forum. He's come out and said this is trash tabloids. Do you think this changes the race?
Well, these comments were shocking, but they really weren't surprising for Mark Robinson. He has a history of these kinds of inflammatory comments that completely disrespect women, that incite violence. We've known for a while that he was someone who is unfit for office. Not only should he not have been elected to the office he's in, he certainly doesn't need to be governor of the state. I think it makes it even more certain that Josh Stein, our Attorney General, will be elected as governor. But I also think that Donald Trump and North Carolina Republican leaders have continued to encourage and support Mark Robinson, and now they're having to reap what they are sowing.
But is it a distraction in the short term, or is this a liability come November 5th?
Well, I think for anyone who has been supporting, encouraging Mark Robinson, it's a liability, because voters are going to look at the fact that Donald Trump and these Republican leaders knew Mark Robinson character. They knew who he was, the kinds of things that he was saying. This is very on brand for Mark Robinson, and it should hurt their candidacies as well as Mark Robinson's.
Do you think it will?
I believe that it will, yes.
So you think Kamala Harris could benefit from this?
Well, I believe even before this that Kamala Harris was on track to make history and win North Carolina. The last Democratic nominee was Barack Obama, who won North Carolina. This was Biden-Harris's closest loss in 2020, 1.3%. There's that same excitement that I felt in 2008 here in North Carolina in 2024. I think North Carolina can make history again. And I think this makes it more likely because Donald Trump has embraced Mark Robinson for quite a while, and he still, to this day, hasn't said anything negative about Mark Robinson.
Well, he'll be here tomorrow, so potentially he'll have to comment on it.
Yeah.
But just about winning North Carolina for the Democrats, you mentioned Barack Obama. He only won it, though, in 2008, only his first term. Why is this a state that is willing to vote for Democrats at the state level? You know, you've benefited from that, but not at the national level.
North Carolinians are very independent, and they will split their ticket. We've seen this time and time again, so this is not unusual. We're a very purple state. We're always going to be close. But I'll tell you this, Donald Trump has to win North Carolina in order to be president. If Kamala Harris can win this race here, and we believe she can, she's the next president of the United States.
The top issue in national and local polls has been inflation. Do you find that voters are more willing to blame the politicians in Washington, D.C. and not the local ones?
Well, people are frustrated with paying more at the grocery store. They're frustrated that their dollar doesn't go as far. But it's pretty clear that Kamala Harris has worked very hard to help control costs. She's worked to make sure that we've got better paying jobs for people. But now she came to North Carolina and rolled out her economic plan that's going to help small businesses, to help fight higher prices at the grocery store. I think that is having an effect already, that inflation is cooling in our country. I think that's going to be positive for her, and I think people have listened to her and believe that she cares about middle class North Carolinians. Donald Trump only cares about the wealthy and corporations and himself.
So the rate of inflation has come down, but people are still struggling with the level of prices. That's not coming down. And a lot of things Kamala Harris talks about, you need congressional support, and it's very slim on details. Do you think she needs to dive deeper into the policy discussions?
So she's rolled out a very specific plan, but she's also aware that getting legislation through Congress requires a lot of work and consensus building. And she was a key part of the Biden-Harris administration that got through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the American Rescue Plan, CHIPS and Science, all of this legislation that's going to make generational investments. She was a part of doing it, cast the deciding vote sometime. She understands that she's going to have to get down into the details and find ideas that work. You know, people talk about trying to fight higher prices at the grocery store, and she's talked about trying to fight those prices. There are ways to do that. I'm excited about the fact that she's ready to take this on.
The other top issue in this race, especially in North Carolina, that when you look at the polls, is abortion. This is something you've been focused on. One thing I've gathered from all the polling is that voters in North Carolina seem to want a middle ground. They seem to coalescing around, say, 15 weeks as a cutoff for abortion. Do you think this is something Democrats and Republicans could compromise on?
I think you can't compromise on women's right to choose. I don't think that you can compromise on the fact that we've got women who are in danger of dying because doctors are afraid of the government coming in and getting between them and their patient. That's exactly what's happening across the country. Donald Trump is
but
responsible.
Not in North Carolina.
Well, yeah, we are, because we have a 12-week abortion ban, and not only that, but with more requirements, a 72-hour requirement that many women have a difficult time facing. They've put in a lot of other restrictions. So there is an abortion ban in North Carolina that passed over my veto by one vote. Every Republican voted to override my veto. Every Democrat voted to sustain it.
So it came from 20 to 12. But do you think there could be a compromise for, say, something like 15 or 16 weeks?
You know, you can't talk about women's health in that way because many of these cases are very complicated and often involve parents who really want to have children but have extraordinary complications. This is an issue that should be left to women and their doctors, and that's why people like Donald Trump, people like Mark Robinson are dangerous, because they believe that politicians should be in that exam room with women and their doctors, and that there should be hard and fast rules. And what happens is you endanger women's lives. You take away what should be their constitutional rights.
The former president has said he wants to leave it up to states, which I know is something that you're dealing with now with your Republican-led legislature. I just want to end on your future, because if you think Kamala Harris is going to win North Carolina, you'll be the man to help deliver those electoral votes for her. What do you have in sight? Is it the Court of St. James? Is it Attorney General?
So what I have in sight is the finish line of my term as governor. You know, I want to run through the tape. There's so much happening here, investing these generational dollars for our children and grandchildren. I love public service. I'll see what's next after this.
So you're not done yet. You're not going to end politics after you leave this
don't
beautiful
think so.
governor's mansion.
I don't think so. I do like public service, and we'll see what happens.
Do you think that there needs to be a different, almost more trust in the DOJ right now that we're seeing? Is that something you think you could bring to Department of Justice?
So I'm not going to get into what other cabinet position that I may or may not be involved in. What I do know is that Kamala Harris has got to win before she can make those kinds of choices, and we're going to work hard every day to make sure she does.
Well, I think you're on the short list. Governor Roy Cooper, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
That was
All right, everybody. That, of course, is one of the hosts, I should say, co-hosts of Bloomberg Surveillance, Anne-Marie Hordern, sitting down with the sitting North Carolina Governor, Roy Cooper. And they
really trying to get out of him whether or not he wants to run the DOJ. And he does not want to answer. He said, I don't think so, but I really like public service, which means,
hint, hint.
yes, I would do that job if it were offered to me.
It's how it works. It's how it works.
Why don't they just say, like, yeah, I'd love to run the DOJ. I think I could do a great job.
Is often what they say.
Yeah.
I serve at the pleasure, right? Anyway, some headlines also. If Harris wins North Carolina, she'll become president, that according to Governor Cooper. But if you missed any of that interview, be sure to check out Bloomberg.com and also check out the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Carol Massar along with Matt Miller. We're counting you down to the close on this Friday. About 20 minutes left in the trading session. This is Bloomberg.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just got under 20 minutes left in the trading session. So much going on. We thought it was going to be, it was kind of a mellow, even though the triple witching, like we just said, even that was kind of mellow.
Yeah.
And then we got, bam, Wall Street Journal coming out and saying maybe Qualcomm
And nothing more than a
with Intel.
headline
No,
so far,
but
right?
the stock's definitely moving on the news.
Yeah, we have Intel shares that were halted for a little while. Now they're up 6.5%. Qualcomm shares
down
are
about 3%.
Yeah, but you can see Wall Street Journal news on the Bloomberg terminal.
You can, indeed.
And so far, it just says Qualcomm has made a takeover approach to Intel in recent days, according to people familiar with the matter, and Dow Jones Newswires.
All right.
So that's it.
We're chasing this story, too. We're going to have more on it in just a moment. Having said that, we do want to talk about the market day and the market week. With us is Kathy Entwistle. She's Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, joining us from New York City. Kathy, nice to have you here. Before we get into the macro, any thoughts, though, about kind of the semiconductor space and deal flow, especially on this? What we have is just a headline.
Is it ripe for consolidation?
Absolutely. I think consolidation is key. And whenever you see any company having a loss in share price, maybe it becomes more attractive. Maybe there's opportunities for synergy, cost cutting, and delivering a higher, PE. Of course, this makes sense for this time of, this time in the economy to do so, if that's the opportunity.
In general, what do you think about this market environment in a week where, of course, we got the Fed decision? We were counting it down, I feel like, forever to when the Fed would finally make a rate cut. But, what are the market metrics that tell you whether or not this is a healthy market with room to run more to the upside, at least on the equity side of things? I mean, how do you describe it?
I would look at it from a few different angles. Clearly, the markets have hit highs this week based on the run that we've had over the last several months. And in fact, the last 12 months have been pretty good. And at the same time, you want to look at other things. Is is the consumer healthy? Are they still spending? Can they afford, to take out money out of their paycheck for discretionary and just not, the staples? We also look at the corporations. Do they have an opportunity to borrow at lower costs? This is going to be great for corporations because they can now start looking at reducing their borrowing costs, especially for the long term, and that cheapens up the way that they price their products and so forth, and also create a profit for themselves. So I think there's a lot of things going on in the market, the labor market, the economy just in general, and we have a strong balance sheet. I do like equities for the long term. I like stocks for the long term. And we know that we will have some ups and downs and some rocky roads in short-term periods, but it's also an opportunity to add and leg in if need be.
Yeah,
it's
to
also
that potential ups or downs, B of A strategist Michael Hartnett was out with a note saying the markets are pricing in more Fed easing than the Fed, and 18% earnings growth for the S&P 500 by the end of next year, which is, a tantalizing deal for equity investors. He's worried that it's bubblicious, especially if people have to chase this market up. What do you think about that?
I don't disagree. I think those numbers that people are expecting or what's being priced in is definitely high, and we want to be cautious from that standpoint. So we want to look for the opportunities that where the prices are more reasonable. And there's different areas of the market where they see that, where we can see that. Financials, healthcare, software with the technology side. There's different areas that we're still looking at and considering for clients. The other area that I think when we look at the size of a company, the mid-sized companies should do well as the Fed, begins their rate cutting cycle. And I think we were all pleasantly surprised to see that there was, the big move this week. And we've been waiting for a move. We've got the move, and that's just the beginning. And it tells us which direction we're going in. So we want to position clients' portfolios for more rate cuts to come.
I just think about last year. At the end of last year, everybody was so aggressive and we pedaled back so quickly. And just coming off an event this week on the West Coast, I felt like the conversations were like, I don't think we're going to get as many rate cuts that everybody thinks. I think the Fed's going to have to be vigilant. I don't know.
Well, you are in good company, Carol.
Thank you.
Because guess who else thinks the same thing?
Mr. Eisman?
Well, Lawrence Summers.
Oh, Lawrence Summers.
He is going to be on Wall Street Week with David Weston tonight, and he said he thinks inflation is going to be potentially a problem that's going to mean the Fed can't go down as deep as the dot plot signifies they want to go. Jamie Dimon also said he's skeptical about a soft landing, and he thinks inflation could be a problem again. These two guys
And
Carol,
the Fed even said that they're still watching. It's not quite there yet.
they have to say that. But every market participant we have on says they don't care about inflation, and they're totally over it.
Yeah.
Do you buy it?
If you're asking me, no, I don't buy it. I think inflation is very important, and it's important to watch it and to make sure that they're hitting the target rates that the Fed, has put out there for us. We're getting close, and they should continue to do this and take it a little bit at a time. So we got our 50 basis points. We're thinking 75 basis points this year, so maybe the next cut will be 25 basis points. They almost had to come out with a little bit more of a position to make a statement. I think especially since when this whole thing started a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about inflationary inflation, that it was just temporary, and that wasn't the case. So they don't want to make that mistake again and anticipate on the wrong side. So there will be a little bit of a fast start, slow start, and tempering it as we go along.
All right. So I don't know. So where don't you want to be right now? Where do you stay away from in this environment?
I don't want my clients to have long-term money in short-term cash right now. I think we've all been spoiled with the high yield savings rates, and a lot of people are still parked in that. We've been talking to clients for a number of months, trying to get ahead of the curve, no pun intended, and to get them moving out further on the with their yields and their maturities. So I don't want to be holding 5% cash when it gets cut to 4.5% and then 4%, and then before you know it, you're down in the 3s. So we want to lock clients in on the fixed income side longer, and we also want to look for opportunities to leg into the equity markets when there are pullbacks. And I don't want to take clients out of equities right now. I want them to stay in because it's almost impossible to time the markets, as we all know, but we can use it for dollar cost averaging on, opportunities of volatility.
All right, we're going to run. Hey, Kathy, thank you so much. Kathy Entwistle, Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, joining us in New York City. All right, folks, we promised you we'd get you more on what's going on in terms of this Wall Street Journal report that Qualcomm has, it seems to have approached Intel, according to people familiar. Again, just a headline from the Wall Street Journal. You've got shares of Intel up about 4% as we speak. You've got shares of Qualcomm down about 4% as we speak. So let's get to it with one of the co-hosts of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, and that is, of course, Ed Ludlow out there.
Honestly, one of the best people we could talk to now. Ed Ludlow has sat down with interviews of with all the most important CEOs in Silicon Valley, but he's especially familiar with Pat Gelsinger. So I think he's a great guy to talk to on this.
All right. So what do we know? What do you think?
I think what we know, very little. The journal, the basics is reporting, citing anonymous sources, that Qualcomm made an approach to Intel in the last few days, and they state in their report that actually they do not have a sense of how receptive Intel is to such a deal. The context is that it's out of left field for two reasons. Intel's just gone through a massive restructuring, which we can discuss the details of, but also for Qualcomm, it doesn't really make any sense. Historically, Qualcomm is a company that designs semiconductors that goes into your smartphone. More recently, they've really wanted to move into the PC field, which historically Intel has dominated, and Qualcomm has made inroads into that market with their own technology. The thing that we don't know is which bit of Intel would Qualcomm on paper want to buy, and so that's why I bring up those 2 points. Because if they wanted Intel's PC business, it would be a departure from the strategy so far, which has worked. If they want the foundry business, the business of manufacturing semiconductors, that's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Well, and are those two businesses going to be separated? Is that something that Gelsinger is really considering moving forward on?
Yes. So the recent news of the week is that Intel is going through a second or restructuring or rethink under Pat Gelsinger. And the biggest part of that is where the foundry business or the manufacturing business is its own standalone entity, its own subsidiary. And this subsidiary would manufacture semiconductors for Intel. Intel designs chips for PCs and for data centers, servers, and a number of other things. But it would also manufacture them for third parties. The Qualcomm story, and again, we do not know this. All we know is that Qualcomm made an approach for Intel, and we don't have any of the financial terms that were offered. But Qualcomm has no experience in manufacturing chips. On this show, Carol, I think I've said this to you so many times in the last few weeks, but we call these companies chip makers. They are not. They're chip designers, and a third party manufactures it for them. So maybe Qualcomm looks at Intel and goes, that would be quite convenient to have our own manufacturing footprint here in the United States, because that part of Intel's business is kind of humming.
Well, you know, what's funny is when the headline initially crossed, I'm like, okay, this is an Intel story. Like, is Intel getting a lifeline? Like, you know, we've talked with Ian King, who's done great dives, as you know, into how Intel got to where it is today. Having said that, I thought, how much of this is a Qualcomm story? Qualcomm looking to transform itself in a different way, right?
I'm just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but I got the emails in my inbox. Intel declines to comment, so I'm just doing that, you know, because you know, again, the Wall Street Journal story is one citing anonymous sources, and neither company is commenting. It's really difficult to answer. Should we do some math together on how feasible such a deal would be? Qualcomm has a market cap of about $185 billion. Intel has a market cap of around $90 billion. Qualcomm has $13 billion on its balance sheet of cash and cash equivalents. And then there's antitrust. I just said on TV to Alex Steele and Vonnie Quinn, I'm not a banker, guys, I'm a journalist. But I do have some experience in reporting on deals, and I don't know how one would finance such a venture.
Don't undersell yourself, Ed.
Thank you.
You know, to me, it seems like if you're going to strike, now is a pretty good time, because Intel is on its knees. I mean, they have plans to build factories, and people aren't really sure if they're going to be able to go through with it. I know the federal government is aching to give them billions and billions of dollars, but they're having to figure out ways to do that, you know, finding them clients, essentially. So, I mean, if you're going to buy Intel at all, I mean, it's better surely to do it after their stock has fallen 60% year to date.
Yeah, there is an element of timing, you know, and you can talk about year-to-date performance, or even the performance of the last 2 years for both companies, relatively speaking. It's just, for me, like, the technology story doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, we interviewed Cristiano Amon, the Qualcomm CEO, many times in the last 2 years. And on earnings in particular, it took a long time for investors to give him credit for his vision of moving Qualcomm beyond a company that did one thing, which is the RF chip in your phone and the modem in your phone, particularly on behalf of the likes of Apple, right? He wanted Qualcomm to design semiconductors that did all kinds of things in cars and now PCs. He wanted to be at the cutting edge of virtual augmented reality headsets. And it took a lot of time to show up in the financials, but it is now showing up in the financials. And so, you know, forget the foundry business for a second. Intel has all these products across PC and data center that Qualcomm is now being competitive in its own right. So why, you know, from a technology perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense either.
Looking at the journal story, I know you've been looking at it as well. A deal far from certain. The people cautioned to get the deal done, Qualcomm could intend to sell assets or parts of Intel to other buyers. So just a few more aspects of this. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting to get our head around it, right? There's just so little information. You do wonder. But yeah, Intel is in a weaker spot. And I guess we keep trying to think about, what is the Intel of the future? The government, you know, in conversations we've had with you and with Ian King about the importance of having Intel as a chip company in the United States is important for national security concerns, right? It's important for the United States. So you do wonder about something seems to have to happen to Intel going forward.
Yeah, I also didn't really answer Matt's question, for which I apologize. And both of your questions basically, well, isn't Intel in a perilous situation? And again, go to the two parts of its business. It used to be a clear leader in many markets, which it's now not. You know, you guys know the story so well. In data centers, everybody wants NVIDIA's GPU to train AI models. Intel didn't have one for quite a long time, but it also was over-indexed towards CPUs, a more basic processor, and then demand fell away. On the foundry side, they wanted to be the factory for chip makers or chip designers all over the world, but they weren't really. And that was why it was significant that they were able to name AWS as a customer to show that they could service a third party. But at the same time, running a business is about how much revenue you're generating, how much you're spending to generate that revenue, and what either your profit and losses are. And they had to do something desperate to react to that, which is all of the projects initiated in the last couple of years were reviewed, and they cut back, they cut headcount. And so they seem to be on a path forward, which again, the timing of this, the Wall Street Journal's report is that Qualcomm approached Intel, not necessarily that Intel was shopping
Correct.
itself or anything like that.
Right. That's a
so
big
it's just
difference. Isn't that a big difference?
It is a big difference.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, frankly, what this may get me in hot water, I don't know, but Pat Gelsinger's job was on the line, and as of the latest board meeting and strategy review, he survived, right? So I don't necessarily think that makes sense either from his perspective in trying to turn around the company.
I just wonder about the two businesses, Ed. If you had to assign, out of the $90 billion in market cap, if you had to assign some of that to the design business and the rest to the foundry business, how's that breakdown look?
Just quickly, kiddo, got about 30 seconds.
I'm trying to bring up FA Go and give you the actual answer, and I can't. I'm not quick enough. But I think basically that at this point, it's a pretty even split, but the future's predicated on foundry.
Pretty wild. All right. You might have a busy weekend.
I imagine he's going to be working the phones.
Sorry.
And he's looked so bummed out. Ed had something planned for tonight, and it's off now.
You can tell. It's like, honey.
My wife watches this show, listens to this show, so yeah.
All right, Ed Ludlow, of course, co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television. All right, I'm
Shout
Carol
out to
Messer.
Mrs. Ludlow.
Be kind, be kind. We'll see what happens with this deal. This is certainly one of the things that's front and center. Qualcomm, Intel, what might be next? All right, we're heading over to our TV colleagues, counting you down to the close on this Friday. The closing bell starts right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
About 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day, Alex Steele and Bonnie Quinn here to help you take you through the closing bell. We got a global simulcast for you, joined now by Carol Masser and Matt Miller, bringing together Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube audiences worldwide to parse through the most crucial moments of the trading day. I'm looking here, the market at a headline level here, guys, not that exciting, but volume elevated versus that 10-day average.
I'm going to say the crucial moment happened about, 40 minutes ago, when that headline crossed from the Wall Street Journal. I mean, Qualcomm and Intel, it's just a reminder. Friday afternoon, you think things are quiet, and then bam, again, just one headline, but, got two stocks moving. Intel up about 3%, and you've got Qualcomm down about 3%. I know you guys have been talking about it a lot.
Yeah, I want to point out that the crucial moment was not triple witching. It seems like every quarter someone gets super psyched about expiries and nothing ever happens. When was the last time an expiry made a difference in the market?
Did you not see the massive volume we had at the cash open today? Volume was up like 222%.
True. I'm just talking about price action because when I look at my 401k, I don't care what the volume was,
Well, we're going to definitely see an impact on Palantir and Dell, for example, because they're going to be entering the index. So that's going to be something to maybe watch for next week. Maybe not today necessarily. I remember the last time there was quadruple witching and a rebalancing. We also saw the same thing, that some of the stocks that were entering the indices didn't necessarily go higher on that particular day, but they did in the days following.
We got some gains for the week, guys, right? Overall, I'm just looking at the Dow maybe up about 1.6% and the NASDAQ up about 1.5%. So overall, Fed meeting, lots of stuff.
The S&P up 1.25%.
Oh, yeah.
You left out the most important one. When we're talking about the indexes, and by the way, Bonnie, that is Bloomberg style. Indexes.
Indices?
No, that's not right.
Guys, the bells. They're the bells. And we made it to the end of the trading week. You're looking at S&P settling out down by about 0.2%. We're still getting through the numbers here, guys, but the NASDAQ is up by 0.4%. Tried to make a run into positive territory on that Qualcomm Intel report from the Wall Street Journal. Just couldn't hang on to it. and the Dow slightly positive. I want to put out mid caps, which hit a record high and had a rally, a record rally yesterday. Mid caps closing down by about 0.7%. The Russell 2000 underperforming, off by 1.1%. Carol.
All right, and just going back to the S&P 500 in terms of, as we dig a little bit deeper into that index, got 173 names in the S&P 500 to the upside, guys. More than 300 names losing ground. Constellation Energy, your best performing name in the S&P 500 this week, at the bottom of the pack. One we talked about last night and this morning and throughout the day. FedEx down about 11% for the
Definitely casting a pall over this market. But if you look into the S&P 500, you'll see there's quite a lot of red. So many of the sectors were in the red today. Not, though, down by as much as some sectors were up yesterday. So not a hugely down day. But as you can see, some of the defensive plays were lower, like, you know, real estate, for example, that on interest rates, industrials. But you also had information technology, perhaps a little bit of profit taking before the weekend. That whole sector down just about 0.5%. And of course, let's not forget the Intel Qualcomm story towards the end of the session that definitely had a little bit of an impact, at least on certain stocks.
All right, a lot of red. Certainly,
That's
as
a
you
weird
look at
view.
that map. What?
The IMAP. Why don't you use GRR?
Okay, there's a couple different ways you can look at the market.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we like the visual of just the colors. It's a little easier to see sometimes.
It's a really great visual.
Yeah, we don't go on your show and criticize your graphics.
He's a little difficult today. I'm just going to mind you. He's got some cold medicine.
All right, Matt, so the
He's a
S&P
little
500
difficult.
ID PW PRD was the top performer. Explain what that is to us, then GRR.
Is that the utilities index?
No.
All right.
2.7%.
You guys take this outside. I'm going to get to some of the individual
Yes,
gainers,
please.
if I may. Thank you, Alex. Nike, it's up just shy of 7% in today's session, off its highs, among the top gainers in the S&P 500. We know the story, right? We talked about this yesterday, late yesterday. The company CEO, John Donahoe, he is out. They're bringing back longtime executive Elliott Hill out of retirement to really kind of help this company that's had some struggles in terms of sales. So this one, definitely an outperformer in today's session. Constellation, I mentioned, the best performing name in the S&P 500, not only in today's session, but also for the week overall. Stock up 22% today. Big story. You guys talked about it. We did. And this has to do with Constellation Energy, the owner of course, 3 Mile Island. It's going to invest $1.6 billion, reviving it, agreeing to sell at least one of them, I should say, agreeing to sell all of the output to Microsoft. So Microsoft looking to power all of its computing needed for AI. So that was a big performer, Constellation Energy. One more, CrowdStrike, again, a top performer in the S&P and NASDAQ 100, up 8%. This company, you had an analyst coming out, BMO Capital Markets, underscoring the need for consolidation in the cybersecurity market and that the tech company will likely help lead it, specifically CrowdStrike.
Can I just say?
Yeah, please.
Constellation Energy not only has done so well, but it is the top, it's the number 3 best performing stock in the S&P so far this year.
Wow.
So for the year overall.
Who would have thought?
Huge, huge, right? Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
That is cool, especially when you feel like energy is one of the biggest losing sectors.
They're oil.
I probably
Yeah.
should mention Intel too, of course, on that headline because it's up about 3.5% here at the close.
Good
now.
flag.
Yeah.
You want to know
Decliners? I would love
the losers?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
FedEx,
we
obviously.
like to call them decliners.
Oh, okay.
Not
So
losers.
not losers, right? But if you're down 15% in a day, I feel like big L there. We know the story. We broke it yesterday on this program. The biggest drop in 2 years after warning that business would slow in the year ahead and also missing expectations for the quarter that was. It's an ominous sign for the direction of the U.S. economy as a bellwether. FedEx, like UPS, which said earlier this year, was hurt by a pullback on priority services as customers traded down to cheaper shipping options. And we heard about a couple of them today. On Track apparently is a shipper you could use.
Never heard of them.
I had never heard of it either.
But they're trying to build out.
And I think people are less concerned about getting there absolutely positively, tomorrow morning, and it could take a couple of days. Another one of the losers today is Dana. I love this company because they make probably the most famous axles in the world. You know, if you put a Dana 44 or a Dana 60 on your rock crawler, you're definitely not going to break that differential. But they also make other propulsion
Bonnie and
equipment.
Alex, weren't we just talking about this company
What
and
language are we
axles,
speaking?
right?
Well,
Totally. I dig my Axel. Go ahead.
I believe that Alex knows about this.
She
This is the
probably
kind of thing
does.
Alex would dig
She
into.
totally would know.
Anyway, it's a supplier to the auto industry, and it was down after Wells Fargo downgraded the stock to underweight. So essentially, a nice way of saying sell, citing expectations for falling sales in the North American heavy truck and Super Duty markets. And then Lennar shares fell the most intraday since August, which was only last month. So traders digesting fourth quarter forecasts for new orders and delivery that were short of the highest analyst expectations. So they didn't, if the market is priced to perfection, you have to do better than meet. You really have to beat.
True.
And they didn't do that. So Lennar shares down 5 1/3% at the close.
All right, I'm taking a look at the bond market here, guys. We all know the story. Steeper curve, steeper curve, steeper curve. That continued today. So selling all across the curve there. You have 15 basis points now, the spread between the 2 and the 10s. If you just take a look on a weekly basis, you have the 2-10 spread steepening for 5 straight weeks. We have not seen that kind of rally and consistent rally since October of 2021 within the yield market. And you're taking a look at, 15 basis points is that spread there. We're now at the highest since June of 2022, guys.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the stories popping on our radar. This one, among the most read on the Bloomberg, has to do with J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon speaking at an event in Washington, the Atlantic Festival, and basically saying he remains skeptical about a soft landing following that 50 basis points cut that we got by the Federal Reserve. And he said he wouldn't count my eggs on that outcome, although we think he means he wouldn't put all his eggs in that basket.
No, I think he means don't count your chickens.
Okay.
Yeah,
Not
I think
supposed
it's
to count
don't count their chickens before they hatch.
Okay, so he means something like that.
It's interesting to me because Larry Summers said essentially the same thing on Wall Street Week, which you'll see a brand new episode of Wall Street Week, a brand new format for Wall Street Week tonight at 6 o'clock. But Larry told David yesterday or the day before that inflation could be a real problem, and it could keep the Fed from going as deep as it wants in terms of the terminal rate. I thought it was also interesting that Summers said the mortgage rate you're going to get right now could be the best deal you're going to get over the next 5 years.
Oh, boy.
So if you're looking to refi, at least according to Larry Summers, you might want to consider now instead of waiting.
Definitely not refining. 2.75% 30-year fix. Okay. Guys, I know. I'm such a jerk.
What do you guys have?
Maybe we should all just take next week off, because that's exactly what we should do if we're trying to get into Manhattan from pretty much anywhere. It is UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly. It's also Climate Week, and it's going to be a complete traffic nightmare. They're already calling it, what was it called? Like a gridlock alert days for the entire week. That sounds horrible, you guys.
We've lived it before. It's not fun. And don't think about getting in a cab. It's all about walking or taking the subway, right? It's all about that.
It's the worst. I mean, UNGA, I prefer SantaCon. It's like the worst thing that happens in New York City.
SantaCon?
Wait, are you saying that UNGA is better than SantaCon?
I prefer SantaCon to UNGA, and SantaCon is pretty annoying as well, right?
I don't know where to go with that. At least UNGA is trying to help the world.
Exactly.
So I'll take a little bit of gridlock for helping the world.
All right, well, count yourself warned, guys. It's going to be rough in terms of traffic next week. All right, that is a wrap on this Friday. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals, we call it the closing bell. We'll see you guys all on Monday.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, this is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Matt Miller in for Tim Stenevec on this Friday. We're just under 2 hours away from Wall Street Week on Bloomberg TV and radio, which, as we mentioned yesterday, is relaunching around the idea that it's more than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about. Back with us on tonight's kickoff of the Rethink and Reboot is David Weston, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week, which airs every Friday at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and TV. Congratulations, first of all. I know you guys have been working a lot in terms of this change. We talked about the rethink and what you guys are doing different. We've talked about the different stories, too, that you guys are looking into. Education, we talked about yesterday. Auto is another area, though. That's a big one.
Yeah, and we're coming back to auto because of Matt.
Is it really?
Yeah, but I'm not getting
Everything's because of
I'm not
Be
getting
very-
a GRR. I'm not going to do that. Just leave that alone.
Be very careful.
Matt loves the story and knows the story well, and I know it some too. Coming from Michigan, I've worked in auto plants, in fact, and so we went to tell the story, and it's an interlocking story of Detroit, of course, and how wonderful it was in the early part of the last century and how it fell, and now it's trying to come back, and of the auto industry, and particularly Ford. We talked with Jim Farley, for example, about what happened, and Jim had a particular point of view. Matt has talked to him, knows this as well, because his grandfather actually worked at the River Rouge plant, that famous River Rouge plant of Ford downtown Detroit, way back when, the Model Ts, the Model As. And then Jim, went to work for Toyota, of all places, which was pretty much treason in the state of Michigan back then, because they were making a better car for cheaper. And so we talked to him about what's going on now, why he did that, what he learned from it, and what he has to look forward to. This is part of what he had to say.
I worked for Toyota for a couple of decades. I've never seen a competition like this. They have full sponsorship of their government. The government bet on EVs before anyone else in the world. They're the largest market in the world, and now they're the most important market in the world.
And the competition he's talking about, of course, is not Japan, is not Toyota, it is China. Because he's been over there, he's seen it, and he says they are really inexpensive. They've got the cost way down, the quality's way up. But when I asked him at one point, how do you make sure you don't make the same mistake that they made back in the 80s?
Right.
How do you avoid that? He said that's the most important question there is. And it's not up to one person, it's up to the whole team, but he has to deliver low cost and high quality no matter what, and then hope that the government does something about the unequal playing field.
I am psyched to watch this program. I've been waiting for, not as long as you have, obviously, but for weeks to see what you guys are doing in this new format. I know you're going to talk also about restaurants, because I saw the CEO of Daniel Boulud's restaurant empire in a preview.
You're off cars already?
Oh, do we want to stick to cars?
Well,
We're trying to go where you wanted to go, but
I am curious. Does he think that they can do it? Because
Farley?
Because China has such an advantage. I feel like.
But do you think if he thought they were going to lose, he would tell David?
Yeah.
No, I guess not.
No, but I asked him.
But I do wonder how they do it. It's a different place.
Well, he had an interesting expression I hadn't heard before, because I asked him at one point, okay, if you're on the rebound, how far are you along in that rebound? Are you out of the woods? And he said, no, we're not. He said, what he said was, our backs are off the stovepipes, was actually what he said. So he thinks, they're not losing the way they were before, but he's the first one to say they've got an awful long way to go, and they've got some pretty ferocious competition out there.
Does he think there needs to be more U.S. government involvement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't just blame it on the government, and he keeps saying we have to do the job, which we didn't do back in the 80s. But he says this is such an unequal playing field because the Chinese government has so intervened and so supported their industry there that they cannot survive. And of course, we know the Bush administration is doing that. They're imposing 100% tariffs, right, on EVs from China, as Europe is to a lesser degree.
The Biden administration.
Biden, what did I say?
Bush.
Oh my gosh.
Interesting, because your show is ultimately about capitalism, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's not like there are two systems, a centrally controlled economy and a total free market capitalism. There's always going to be nuance there, right? And I look forward to your show kind of delving into that and exploring it.
Yeah, actually, if you go back to Adam Smith, he didn't believe in sort of unfettered capitalism. He didn't believe in just ruthless capitalism. He thought there had to be governance on it, which there has to be. At the same time, and I believe this firmly, as much as there have been abuses and things that have gone wrong, capitalism has been a stronger force for good in the world over the last 200 years than any other force I can think of off the top of my head. More people come out of poverty because of capitalism. More people have better health service because of capitalism than anything else. So the question is, how can you get the best of that, and leave behind some of the abuses, which there are. There are abuses without a question. And for me, at least, that's one of the questions in this election.
Yeah.
Who has a plan for that?
Right.
Recognizing there's a real force for good in capitalism, but we've got a cabinet. We've got to keep it in the right place.
I mean, it's just, it's so appropriate to this show, to the election, because those issues, if you're really a free market capitalist, you don't believe in protectionist tariffs.
No.
The Republican Party used to not believe in protectionism. If you're really a free market, if you're really a libertarian, you don't believe in borders, right? You want free flow everywhere. And the Republican Party is very much in favor of borders right now. So
you mentioned Larry Summers, and we did talk with Larry Summers, and that's one of the things he talks about is some of these tax plans, where he says there's essentially no economists who thinks what you should do is you should narrow the tax base and then raise the taxes in order to pay the bills. Every economist says you should do the opposite. Broaden the tax base, take away the deductions and the exceptions, and then lower the tax rate. That's what we should do for the economy. And yet, frankly, both former President Trump and Vice President Harris right now are putting things out there that would narrow the tax base, limit what you're going to tax from, and that would inevitably sooner or later mean we have to raise taxes given our debt
Basic
deficit.
math, right? If you're taxing
it's
less
arithmetic.
people,
Or
it's like
cut
crazy.
spending. Or we have to cut spending. Which is
Well, it is interesting, though, in terms of capitalism. I have a lot of younger nieces in particular who are like, capitalism, it doesn't work. Like, look at all the people who are suffering. And it's interesting. But I do think it's
younger people can't buy houses.
It's not perfect, right? It's not perfect. And we do think about, like, how do we make it so that more people benefit?
No system is, but I want to pick up on what Matt said there. You can cut spending, because we also have a story about the business of higher education and what needs to be done. And we interviewed Mitch Daniels, former head of the OMB. And what he did at Purdue, he first went and became governor of Indiana, then took over Purdue. Within 3 or 4 months, he froze tuition. It's been frozen for 12 or 13 years now. And he said the reason he did that was, he said, instead of saying, how much money do you need? Now we'll set the tuition. He said, you have just the same amount of money as last year. Now figure out how to spend it, which is a way that maybe our government might take a look at it. I mean, back when I had to run budgets, we used to do that kind of thing.
Well, listen, right? We all have budgets. How do we get there, though, David? Because it feels like politics, I don't know, we haven't done that for so long.
The thing is, I personally am convinced we'll get there. The question is, how much damage do we do before we get there? Because sooner or later, the bond markets will tell us we have no choice.
Right. You can't just keep spending.
And it's just going to get worse and worse. We'll be better off if we make moves now that we
before the vigilantes come on the scene.
Exactly right.
Do we get to talk about Danielle? Because it's one of my favorite restaurants.
Danielle?
It's a great restaurant.
Yes.
I feel like I went there
Don't
once
you
with
love
you
that the
and
girl
Danielle.
actually did the car stuff?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sexist in that
Go
sense.
ahead, do the restaurant stuff.
You talked to the CEO of Danielle Boulud's restaurant empire about how they make something fun and notoriously difficult work as a business.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it is, believe it or not, money. Sebastian Silvestri, who runs Dynex, because Daniel Boulud, we talked to him as well. He's charming and wonderful. He's a genius, but he's got a big company. In fact, they have 100 people in their corporate headquarters here in New York, running 13
That's a big
restaurants around the world. It's a
organization.
big organization. And he said, basically, you have to spend a fair amount of money. You have to really pony up.
It was the one thing that I thought during the pandemic. I was amazed at some of the well-known chefs who have well-known restaurants and said how tough it was, even for them to survive during the pandemic.
And we talked to Danielle about it. We also talked about
Silvestri?
Oh, Silvestri.
Danny Meyer.
Danny Meyer.
Danny Meyer.
About how bad it was for them, in part because of something I learned from this experience. I guess it's not a surprise. The thing that makes a successful restaurant successful is that people get along together on the staff, and they welcome the people in. And when you have to lay those people off, it was brutal for these people.
Yeah, they're a family.
Yeah, they're a family.
They're like all in it. Well, congratulations. Looking forward to it.
Thanks very much.
David Weston, the host of Bloomberg Business Week, the reboot, what you need to think about. Catch it at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. We're going to do some thinking and transformation of brains. That's coming up next.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Intel higher today by 3.3% after the Wall Street Journal reported that Qualcomm approached the company about a takeover, a potential record-setting deal for the chip industry. Qualcomm down 2.9%. Again, Intel up today by 3.3%. The newspaper says the discussions occurred in recent days, citing sources. Representatives for Intel and Qualcomm declined to comment. But again, Intel today up by 3.3%, Qualcomm down 2.9%. Turned out to be an update for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, gaining 0.1%, finishing the week at 42,063, up 38 points. S&P lower by 11, ending the week just above 5,700, retreating from a record 5,702, down 0.2%, while NASDAQ fell 65, a drop there of 0.4%. 10-year yield 3.73%, with a 2-year yielding 3.58%. Gold up 1.3%, $26.20 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil lower today, little change, down 3 cents, $71.92 a barrel. Neuberger Berman Senior Portfolio Manager Steve Eisman is taking a leave of absence after he posted on a social media account remarks indicating he was, quote, celebrating the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza. A spokesperson says Eisman's leave of absence is effective immediately. Again, recapping, S&P down 11, down 0.2% for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, so using your mind, yes, perhaps to play some games on folks, which is not always so nice, or using it to be the best you, get the most out of what you do, not always easy in a highly distracting and increasingly short attention span world, which is why we are super eager to hear from our next guest. With us is neuroscientist and physician and author of a new book that came out just this week. With us is Dr. Mithu Staroni. Her new book, Hyper Efficient, Optimize Your Brain to Transform the Way You Work. She joins us from London. Dr. Staroni, it's great to have you here with Matt and myself. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do, because sometimes I feel like when it comes to the brain, I often hear like we've only just scratched the surface in understanding how it works and what it can do for us, but kind of set the record straight here, or what you have been aware of.
Well, I've been very interested in how we have been really ignoring the brain's dynamics when it comes to looking at mental performance and working in general. We know quite a little bit about the brain now, but we've ignored much of that in the way we impose, and we impose work routines on ourselves, and we just follow the structure of work as it is. So my biggest learning curve has been figuring out the disparity between the way we work and the way the brain actually works.
So when I look at your book, Hyper Efficient, Optimize Your Brain to Transform the Way You Work, first of all, I Google this kind of thing like all the time. How can I stop procrastinating? You know, how can I become more efficient? How can I get more organized? Because I am such a disorganized ADD procrastinator. Is it about changing my habits? Do I need to develop new habits? Or is it actually about changing my brain chemistry? Or like, what is wrong with me and where do I start to try and fix it?
It's about changing the way you look at work. So we have been working and expecting our own brains to work really like a machine on an assembly line, because we started adopting the pattern of assembly line work back actually during Fordian times, and when knowledge work came into the territory, we didn't really change the way we worked, although we changed what we worked on. And we continue to impose this pattern of assembly line efficiency on the brain, which was all fine while the brain did a lot of simple level cognitive work. But now that AI and automation has come onto the scene, we need to think about working in a way that really takes the brain to its peaks of qualitative output, so that it really works well, creates those ideas, makes those excellent decisions, comes up with innovative ideas, original ideas. And for that to happen, you know, the brain doesn't put pieces together on an assembly line. The brain has its own rhythm of working. So instead of just following the 9 to 5 continuous, monotonous, and constant paced work that we usually do, it's time to reframe work and work according to the brain's rhythms.
Well, help me understand that. Like, I remember being out at Pixar and doing a deep dive into the company, and they basically were like, we don't care when you work, as long as you get it done. And we know creative types might wake up in the middle of the morning or middle of the night. And so people were sometimes out during the, at lunchtime playing volleyball or having a barbecue. This was years ago. And then, they just didn't care as long as the work got done. So I am curious how to apply what you are saying. And first of all, I want to understand, what do you really mean by an assembly line kind of way of using our brain? What does that mean?
So what I mean by that is, normally we have this structure of work where we go to work at a fixed time in the morning, we leave work, whether at home or officially in the office, at a sort of fixed time in the evening, and we expect our brains, we expect ourselves to work continuously during that entire time at a constant pace. But if you actually look at how the brain works, you will know intuitively that you cannot churn out really good ideas, continuously assemble them at the same pace throughout the day. You will have peaks of moments when you are really good at coming up with ideas, and there'll be other times in the day when you just feel this slump, and that's your brain naturally slumping. So for instance, we know that after lunch, everyone has something known as a post-lunch dip. We also know that creativity seems to peak first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And so really kind of harnessing these peaks and these natural peaks and troughs in the brain's natural rhythmic performance actually allows your output to be much better. So, you can write lots of emails, you can make, do reports without really working at your peak. And that's what most of us do. Now that machines have come into the landscape, they will do that kind of work for us better and at larger volumes and faster. So we are now left with these incredible array of tools, and it's up to us to actually now use the brain for what it's for, how it's different from machines. So in terms of working with a quality of output in mind rather than focusing on quantity.
Obviously, you're talking to two people who cover finance in New York. So the idea here is you pay someone to work as hard as that person can all day and all night and expect everything. Are there societies or cultures that have adapted work to the way the brain functions? Do you see like anthropological cases of, a good use of the brain or a good work schedule?
So anthropologically, historically, hunter-gatherer communities in the past and present hunter-gatherer communities, for instance, if you look at the way they work, if you look at the way we used to work before the pre-industrial era, we never really worked continuously as in an assembly line. We used to work in sort of bursts, almost in kind of power law patterns, where we worked really intensely for short periods of time and less intensely for longer. And I think really the thing we need to do is we need an attitude, we need a kind of an attitude and emphasis change, because eventually each organization, each individual will have their edge based on the quality of mental output. Given machines, automation, AI, they'll be doing quantity of output better than we are. So we need to start looking at work and looking at productivity in terms of how many meetings did it get to come up with a really good quality, sellable, unique idea? How many hours did it take to come up with this quality of output? So if we start visualizing and looking and measuring output in that way, that can lead to a step change.
Dr. Stironi, one thing I want to ask you is, my parents were this way. My dad was, an early bird, early riser, and just cracking jokes and wide awake. My mom was a night owl. Kind of same for my husband, night owl, and I'm like really prime in the morning. So is it you kind of gave us some general trends, and your book says the state of mind is most suited to creative thinking and happens from waking until around 9 to 10 a.m., from around 8 to 10 p.m. until bedtime. But are there, I'm assuming there are variations. I mean, Matt, you and I both have done early morning schedules. I came in at 3:30 in the morning.
I prefer the morning.
For a long time.
Yeah.
I did too. I was like on fire. But I do wonder, like, what do you think of those people like us in the media business who come in at kind of odd hours, or people who, I don't know, are opening up stores in the morning, or like different things where they're on kind of crazy clocks? Are we not at our prime, our optimum?
So there are two ways of looking at this. So first of all, we all have a slightly different rhythm and shift towards the morning or the evening. This is known as being a night owl or a lark. And whatever your tendency, this whole cycle is shifted that way. So if you are naturally happier waking up early in the morning, you perform better in the morning, then your whole kind of cycle is likely to start sooner. So your creative window will be sooner during the day and slightly earlier in the evening. And if you're a night owl, it happens the other way around. Yes, of course, we have this problem with globalization and shift work and working at different times. And yes, they will be affecting how optimally productive you are. I mean, our ancestors did not go for a hunt at 3 in the morning, usually. And so we are not mentally geared to do that. But if that is what you have to do, then there are ways still of manipulating your creative time windows, the periods within which you can focus.
How do you help somebody who is locked into a shift? I mean, Carol and I were assigned shows at certain times that they can't be changed. I can't call my boss and say, "Listen, I'm more of an evening person, so I'm going to have to skip this morning show." What kind of tricks can we use?
So the one way to think about it is if you imagine your brain as a sort of engine that works on different gears. And this is a metaphorical way of looking at it. And you can imagine that when your brain is in gear 2, it's performing really well. So you want to get into gear 2. Now, if you wake up very early in the morning, your brain is naturally still sort of in a sleepy state until you train it to be able to do that on a regular basis. And really the hacks that we all know about, things like coffee, things like exercise, your mission there is to kind of get your brain into gear sooner in the day, artificially. So using, I'm sure you drink, I'm not going to say I'm sure, but I would guess you probably do drink caffeine, things like lots of bright light, things like exercise.
We're nodding a lot.
Ways in which
I drink as much caffeine as I can get into my mouth.
So these are ways of kind of gearing up earlier in the day. So you're trying to just push your cycle forward. And then towards the end of the day, I would assume that you go to sleep quite soon. I would hope you do, in terms of, at the end of the day.
Right.
And if that's the case, then you would wind down sooner using all the hacks that I've described.
I use a lot of hacks to wind down.
Hacks with quotation marks. Dr. Steroni, we're going to come back with you in just a moment. We're going to continue with Dr. Mathu Steroni, her book, Hyper Efficient, Optimize Your Brain to Transform the Way You Work. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
talk about more on the benefits of open source AI. So another thing you mentioned in your letter is that open source AI can accelerate innovation and economic growth. How is this already happening, and how do you see this happening more in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a version of this which AI will do no matter how it's developed. And then there's a version of this that I think benefits from open source specifically. So I think that AI has more potential than any other single technology that's being developed right now to increase productivity, accelerate the economy, make it so that kind of every person has the ability to be more creative and produce more interesting things. And I think that that's all going to be great. I also think, I hope that it'll help out with science and medical research and things like that. There are a lot of folks today, though, who don't necessarily have access to the ability to fine-tune or build their own state-of-the-art models. So they're sort of limited to what these large labs do. And like I just said, I think one of the defining aspects of our culture around innovation as a sort of a country or society is like, it's not just big companies that do it, right? There's all these startups and hackers and academics and people in university. And I think you want to give all of those folks access to state-of-the-art models that they can build on top of. Not just that they can run, which is what they have today with the closed vendors, but that they can build on top of and tweak and distill down to smaller models that they can run on their laptop or their phone or whatever other device they're building. And I think that that's just going to unlock a ton of progress. There's also a version of this where you can look at it by nation too. So it's not just that startups might not have the resources or universities might not have the resources to go train their own, large-scale foundation models now or in the future. But there are a lot of countries that aren't going to have the ability to do that because, I mean, pretty soon these things are going to cost many billions of dollars to train. And I think that having the ability for different countries and entrepreneurs in different countries and businesses to use it to serve people better and just do better work is going to be something that basically like lifts all boats around the world and just has a massive kind of equalizing effect. So I think that that's really positive. And, that's one of the places where we get the most thanks for this is not actually the tech community, but it's like different developing countries or other countries that want to have access to the technology and do stuff with it. But wouldn't necessarily have the tech field themselves to produce something that is state of the art that their businesses can build on top of. But once they have it, it's actually pretty easy to go train your own thing. So that's a pretty neat part of this.
Stocks churned in the final minutes of trading today and expiring derivatives contracts and a big
Let's talk about
rebalancing.
more on the benefits of open source AI. So another thing you mentioned in your letter is that open source AI can accelerate innovation and economic growth. How is this already happening, and how do you see this happening more in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a version of this which AI will do no matter how it's developed. And then there's a version of this that I think benefits from open source specifically. So I think that AI has more potential than any other single technology that's being developed right now to increase productivity, accelerate the economy, make it so that kind of every person has the ability to be more creative and produce more interesting things. And I think that that's all going to be great. I also think, I hope that it'll help out with science and medical research and things like that. There are a lot of folks today, though, who don't necessarily have access to the ability to fine-tune or build their own state-of-the-art models. So they're sort of limited to what these large labs do. And like I just said, I think one of the defining aspects of our culture around innovation as a sort of a country or society is like, it's not just big companies that do it, right? There's all these startups and hackers and academics and people in university. And I think you want to give all of those folks access to state-of-the-art models that they can build on top of. Not just that they can run, which is what they have today with the closed vendors, but that they can build on top of and tweak and distill down to smaller models that they can run on their laptop or their phone or whatever other device they're building. And I think that that's just going to unlock a ton of progress. There's also a version of this where you can look at it by, nation too. So it's not just that startups might not have the resources or universities might not have the resources to go train their own, large-scale foundation models now or in the future, but there are a lot of countries that aren't going to have the ability to do that because, pretty soon these things are going to cost many billions of dollars to train, and I think that having the ability for different countries and entrepreneurs in different countries and businesses to use it to serve people better and just do better work is going to be something that basically like lifts all boats around the world and just has a massive kind of equalizing effect. So I think that that's really positive. And, that's one of the places where we get the most thanks for this is not actually the tech community, but it's like different developing countries or other countries that want to have access to the technology and do stuff with it, but wouldn't necessarily have the tech field themselves to produce something that is state of the art that their businesses can build on top of. But once they have it, it's actually pretty easy to go train your own thing. So that's a pretty neat part of this.
To different tasks in quick succession, and they're all very different.
So let's talk about one. Here's a question that's near and dear to your heart. You have a lot of children.
Yes. I'm trying to set a good
example. The birth rate is down in the U.S. What needs to change so people start having more children?
Yeah, so this question has troubled me for a long time because you can look at the demographics. It's a very slow-moving ship. You know who's going to be an adult in 20 years based on who was born last year. So, if you want to, I think have a good approximation for population, really look at how many babies were born last year in a particular country. Multiply that by life expectancy. That's the number of people that will be adults in that country. That's the steady state population if birth rate remains constant. Now, birth rate is not constant, it is dropping. So you look at the second derivative of birth rate, and actually we see an acceleration in the drop in the fertility rate. Second derivative of the fertility rate is very bad. So where does this lead? This does not lead to a greater civilization. This leads to a civilization that potentially dies not with a bang, but with a whimper in adult diapers. That is a sad ending.
So obviously we have countries that, like Korea, used to have a birth rate of 6, it's now 3/4.
Yeah.
Here's a light question for you. What do you
come
think
pick me
are
up,
the
I'll
biggest,
give you a baby, says one
what
of
do you
the...
think are the...
That is one of the things that says on the screen.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone heard that. You want to read it?
It says, Elon, come pick me up, I'll give you a baby. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I certainly encourage everyone in this room to have at least 3 children. Look, baby's got to come from somewhere, and I think we just want to have, I don't know, I think we want to have like a slightly increasing population, not a plummeting population. And I think this applies to all countries and cultures. Like, I don't think we want any country or culture to disappear. We want them to ideally flourish and not disappear. So, in fact, one of the things that is overlooked by probably most historians is the role of low birth rate in the decline of civilizations. So around, I think it was around 50 BC, Rome passed a bill to give a bonus to any Roman citizen that would have a 3rd child. So this was birth rate was a problem in Rome in 50 BC. The Romans weren't making Romans. The same is true of ancient Greece. So there was a time from about 800 BC to 300-ish BC where the Greeks had a lot of kids. and a lot of surviving kids. Like the birth rate far exceeded the death rate, which is why you had Greek cities popping up all over the Mediterranean. But then I think basically it seems to be that prosperity destroys the birth rate. So when a civilization feels like it has no meaningful external threat and is very prosperous, that is what causes the birth rate to plummet. Somewhat counterintuitively, you think, well, if you've got more resources, surely that would lead to more kids. In fact, it is the opposite. The more prosperous a civilization, and the more a civilization feels that it does not need to defend against external threats, the lower the birth rate.
Will feel more difficult for you and your output won't be great. So part of the idea of being hyper efficient is to really
bringing together enough talent in one organization is really hard to do. And if you're working on a problem that, may be modestly successful, it's kind of easy to get the first few people to join. You can give them a lot of equity. But then it gets really hard. Why is employee 20 going to join? Why does this matter to the world? Why should someone work on your startup versus any of the other things they could do? And picking something that matters if you're successful is a great way to do that. And so I think it's really important to think about when you're starting the company, how is this going to evolve into a vision that a lot of people want to help with, that a lot of people want to be associated with? Because I think getting talent and getting mind share is really hard in the current environment, and people are interested in startups that matter. Another thing that we've noticed among our best founders again and again and again is that they have a confident and definite view of the future. They may be wrong, and so we say it's good to be confident and flexible, but this idea that you are confident and definite, this is what I think is going to happen, or this is what is going to happen, and being relatively sure of that, having courage of your convictions, being a clear leader, saying we're going to do this, and that's why, even in the face of a lot of doubt, that seems to really correlate with success. And this comes back to having an ambitious vision, but the entire startup ecosystem is best set up to support companies that have a low chance of success, but are huge if they work. And I think going for something that is huge if it works will attract the best people. I'm not going to talk too much about the team. There are a lot of obvious things I could say that have been said many times by many people about, you need smart people who want to work really hard and who communicate well. These are all really true. But I'd like to mention a few non-obvious things that we've noticed that we don't hear people say as much about the team you need to assemble. Vinod Khosla says that the team you build is the company you build, and I really think that's true. I've still met only a handful of founders, I think, that spend enough time on recruiting, like Mark Zuckerberg is famously one of them. But building a great team, I think, other than picking the right market and building a great product, is the most important thing you do. All founders go through a transition, all successful founders, where you switch from building a product to building a company, and building a company really is about the team. So you need optimists. The whole world will be telling you why you're going to fail as a startup. If you don't have that internal fire of belief, if you don't have people who say, you know what, we are going to do this, and it doesn't matter what the haters say, we're going to figure this out. And there is, this problem, it must be solvable. If you don't have the spirit of optimism on the team, it's very hard to succeed when the world continues to punch you in the face. You need at least some idea generators. There are a handful of people in any company that has gone on to be really successful that I've been able to work with, who are just really good at coming up with lots of ideas. You don't want too many of these people because that's more ideas than a company can follow through on. But having some people within a company that are just constantly throwing out new ideas, most of which will be bad, turns out to be super important to have on the team.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, as we get ready to wrap up here on Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Massar along with Tim
No.
Oops.
Well, that's fine. You know what? I love Tim, so I'm happy.
Who doesn't love Tim?
If you
Who doesn't
mistake
love
me
Matt
for
Miller?
him.
Now, listen, I get lucky. I get to work with both of you guys. Matt Miller, of course, in for Tim Stenivek. Tim will be back, I think, at the end of next week. We're going to talk a little bit about hotels.
He's going to be tired.
He's going to be tired.
He's riding like literally 1,000 miles on a bicycle.
I know. He's unbelievable with his dad, which is really cool stuff. So we're going to hopefully we'll hear from him.
Not staying at any of the 50 best hotels.
Let's get to it because our Bloomberg Pursuits team highlighting the 50 best hotels in the world this year. For the list, we turn to Bloomberg's Justin Ocean and travel czar Nikki Eckstein joining us on the phone. Justin here in studio. Justin, let me kick it off with you. This list is courtesy of who?
The World's 50 Best Foundation. They're famous more for their restaurant list and their bar list. And last year they got into hotels and they want to be in hospitality more generally. But these lists are hugely influential. They drive major, bookings. And so in the hotel world, especially, it's a little iffy. And Nikki, in reporting out this story, did an amazing job of kind of picking apart the methodology of why you need to be a little skeptical when you look at these lists, or at least the context behind them. So, Nikki, I don't know, do you want to?
Well, let me just say, I thought that was super interesting because when I saw the story, I thought, oh, cool, I'm going to see which are the best hotels and maybe there's going to be pictures. But it really gets deep into the methodology and I think asks a lot more questions than I had expected this kind of story to ask. But before we get to that, I feel like we should at least say the best hotels, right? So Nikki, you kick it off with, you kick off your story with the Capella Bangkok, which is a smaller brand. And to be honest, the picture doesn't look it's not like a palace or anything. What's so special about the Capella Bangkok in Thailand?
It's funny you mentioned the palace thing because one of the issues that we have with these lists is how do you really compare an amazing city hotel to a palace in Rajasthan or an island, a private island resort in Tahiti or whatnot? Capella Bangkok is one of maybe a half a dozen five-star openings in Bangkok in recent years that have really propelled that city towards ultra luxury. It used to be a backpacker haven. Definitely don't think of it that way anymore. And earlier this year, when we sent our most itinerant reporter, Brandon Presser, to do a city guide of Bangkok, the Capella really was his favorite out of all of the 20-some-odd hotels that he saw in the city. And of course, Bangkok is having a big moment. White Lotus is about to go there. So everybody is really, really amped up on Bangkok luxury tourism right now.
We'll get into, though, how these lists are determined and some of the issues with it, because
This one specifically, right?
Yeah, and the list, though, tends to kind of be somewhat similar, right, from year to year, it seems like?
Well, this is only the second year that the list has been done for hotels. I think we've seen that pattern play out with restaurants and bars over a much longer period of time. And there's more to say on that front, which maybe we'll get into another time. But with hotels, we're starting to see now who are the mainstays, how many mainstays, how little variation is there in the list from year to year. And about half of it stayed the same. Maybe the positions shuffled, but like half of the names were familiar to this list already. And Capella ranked high last year, too.
So, and I mean, they do it with 600 anonymous jurors, but I guess part of the problem is, for me, the main problem is that hotels are allowed to invite influencers, voters, jurors, and pay for everything, right? So, like the Carlyle made the list, which obviously Bemelman's is an iconic bar, but the rooms at the Carlyle are kind of like...
Matt's having an issue with
They're
it.
yucky. Okay. I mean, I've stayed there and like things broke. The bed was old. Like it's not a super luxurious hotel. And that makes me think... Sorry?
Go ahead, Nikki. Yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say the Carlyle is definitely a hotel that drummed up a lot of conversation. Continue.
Well, I'm just wondering, does the Carlyle, does the company that runs the Carlyle like invite a bunch of people and pay for their stay and like, you know, booze them up so that they'll vote for it?
Well, look, there's a couple things going on there. Rosewood is the company that operates the Carlyle. Personally, I actually have to say I love the Carlyle. I agree with you on your criticisms of it. And in some ways, I think that the old-fashionedness of it and the shab of it is what makes it fabulous, because it's like a real callback to old New York in every way, shape, and form. Like, the staff have all been there for 30 years, and if those walls
The bed's been there for 30 years.
Oh, stop.
That's funny. Maybe some of the rooms have been renovated more recently, because I stayed not too long ago and I had a great sleep. But Rosewood had numerous, I think maybe 4 properties on the list. It was one of the most represented companies. And yes, they have a massive PR operation. They have a massive marketing budget. The fact that it's in New York means that the entire media community is passing through and is able to stay there. And yes, they wine and dine everybody. So this is a problem of the list. This does